Hello and welcome to this afternoon's symposium for the Centre for Fashion Curation. My name is Ben Wyman. I'm the manager of the Research Centre. And so thank you very much for those of you who came in person. And thank you to those also who are online. We're very happy to have you here with us or online listening into these afternoon sessions. I'm just doing a very brief 2-minute rundown in case of any emergency. There isn't a planned fire drill alarm bell this afternoon, so if you do hear a bell, an alarm, please go to the nearest exit. There should be one out this way, the green sign. You can go down this side aisle here, and there's a back entrance through there, or you can go back up to the top of the lecture hall as well and sort of make your way out to an exit to your right. No, left. So yes, and it's a dispersal policy. So if there is an alarm, please exit. If you need any assistance, there are small green communication systems on the walls as well, and you can call someone and they'll be able to help you. Okay? Today we have a series of speakers. I'm not going to introduce them to you because the co-directors, Amy Delahaye and Judith Clark, are going to talk through a little bit about that and the plan for the day. All I wanted to do is this is the first in a series of conversations and discussions and events throughout this coming academic year. So please keep an eye out if you aren't already signed up to the Centre for Fashion Curation mailing list, which I guess you already are. But if you aren't, please do sign up. Get your friends to sign up as well if they're interested in our field. And we will be forwarding information for future events. The broad theme is exhibiting fashion. It's based on the online archive that the Research Centre developed a number of years ago, and it's an online archive of over 2,500 fashion exhibitions from around the world. And we're continuously adding to that. So our broadest theme is using the title Exhibiting Fashion, and following on from that, every few months, the next conversations will be in February and March, and then after that, maybe May or possibly June as well. Please do keep an eye out for the future events. We're planning, let me have a look, what date is this one? Yes, on the 20th of March, 2025, we have Mari McKenzie from the Glasgow School of Art and Sienna Madsen from the London College of Fashion, Centre for Fashion Curation, and they'll be talking about fashion and scent. So please do look out for that event. Following on from that, in May, we're hoping, if Claire and Alexandra Foxwell are happy to talk about their research project that they've only just started on a smock that Claire has in her collection. And so there's a lot of very interesting, insightful conversations coming forward based on the broadest idea of exhibiting fashion. I'm going to stop now and leave it to Amy to continue the conversation introduction.
Thank you. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm going to have to read mine because I'm terrified I'm going to forget someone. So the Research Centre was established in 2012 on a very modest scale by Dr. Francis Corner. Our previous head of college supported us to do it. We now have 18 members and 4 associate members from a broad range of practices. And rather than giving you lots of facts and figures, I thought I'd introduce you to our members and the exciting, innovative and wide-ranging work they create and deliver. We're a core team of 5 people. You've met Dr. Ben Wyman and you'll know Professor Judith Clark. Bree Stritz-Ditt is our administrator and so much more. She and Ben have developed fantastic funding application skills, having never had a background in that area at all. Our practice doesn't really attract industry investment, but over the last 7 years, we've generated about £600,000 for various projects, which is an incredible achievement. And we've had funding from the AHRC, the National Lottery Fund, and we're now waiting for the results of an exciting collaboration with SOAS and Kinshasa School of Art in the DMC. We have a budget. It's not huge, but it's adequate, and Judith and I use it to actively support the work of early career researchers and the non-professorial members of our centre, and we try to provide mentoring too. Our members have undertaken a wide range of impressive, rigorous, critical and highly imaginative creative outputs. which feed high-quality outcomes, including case studies for the University Ref and KEF. Centre members have exhibited and formed professional collaborations with national, regional, subject specialist and independent museums across the UK, and with professional organisations including Show Studio. We've also forged many international relationships, including working with colleagues in Paris, the Netherlands, Vienna, New York, Shanghai, Venice, Oslo, Jataria in Spain, Kinshasa, Australia and Mexico, and they're just the ones that I could think of while I was writing this yesterday. One of our recent outputs has been a really wonderful series of podcasts which was developed by Alison Moloney, who was a former centre member and is now an associate member, incredible curator. And it's a series called The First Object, and she interviews curators about that vital first object, which is something that we all consider so greatly. Dr. Jeff Horsley is about to complete his AHRC funding bid, for which he's developed an innovative fashion exhibition toolkit, particularly for museums with small and non-specialist staff. Claire Wilcox, former V&A curator and author of Patchwork, which won the 2021 Penacoli Prize, is now working, as Ben said, with a former MA student on a funded project, and they're both going to be obsessing about a smock. Caroline Stevenson is Programme Director of Cultural Studies, Cultural and Historical Studies here, and her interests include radical pedagogies, feminism. She's co-founder of Modus, which is a curatorial platform for expanded fashion practice. There's Dr. Flavia Loschiapo, who's a former student, and she's the course leader of Cultural Studies, and her practice is it's fascinating, highly politicised work, which includes exploring human rights, ethno-racial capitalism and forced labour. The centre is we're a centre for fashion curation, but it really is fashion, dress, costume in its broadest sense. And over the last couple of years, we've been forging much closer ties with costume, in particular working with Louise Chapman, who now leads the BA costume course and is going to share some of her PhD practice with us today. Our most recent member is Asha Hall-Jones, who's working in the research department, and we were really thrilled to discover that she's previously worked in museums and archives and has a special interest in museum and sustainability. From the outset, the centre was really closely affiliated with the MA in Fashion Curation. That was initially led by Professor Alistair O'Neill, and then by Judith and myself for several years. After completing his PhD with us, Dr. Geoffrey Horsley took over, and now Dr. Sienna Madsen, who undertook the MA and a PhD with us, now ably leads it. Our alumni have secured jobs working in museums around the world for fashion archives. They work as independent curators, consultants, exhibition makers, writers, cultural events organisers, and now several teach on the course too. In the last year, the course has expanded to embrace cultural production, and so the students are now very fortunate that they're also taught by LCF's cultural producers, Dr. Leila Nazareldin and Mirren Kesling, led by Lindsay Pentalou. There's another member called Lauren Kwawo, who's part of cultural production. Sadly, she's going to leave, but she's very, very interested in AI, and it's an area that we really need research, and so we're hoping we can support her longer term on that. The centre is also responsible for teaching a broad range of students, supervising their PhDs, and we try to focus on practice-based and practice-led research. And as a team, we're striving to develop new and imaginative ways of presenting and evaluating these, because historically, practice-based and practice-led students seemed to do everything that the text-based students did, and they did a whole lot more too. So now we're really trying to see how we can really understand and evaluate the practice which is at the foreground of the research. Many of our students, a disproportionate number, have secured highly competitive Techni funding, and we partner with museums and, where possible, work with their curators so that our students have close access to the collections. The centre also works really closely with LCF Archive, an archivist, Susanna Cordner, with one of our former students, Chloe Gilbert, and the new archivist assistant is Sadia Khan. We also work with Luke Turkey, he's a member of the centre, and he's responsible for technical production at LCF Gallery Spaces. The fifth member of our team is Laura Thornley, who works very closely with Judith and I. I'm just finding something. I'm going to have to show you after. She works very closely with us on our research projects. And for the Making Mischief project, she took complete responsibility for making this wonderful audio map, illustrated map of the area, and wrote all the text and coordinated the illustrations. And Judith, and she works with Judith and I, and somehow it just seems to work that she works intensively with one or other of us without us ever negotiating it. And she's just finished working really, really intensively with Judith, who's curated Elio Fiorucci exhibition with accompanying publications as part of Triennale Milano. And it's now my pleasure to hand over to Judith, who's going to talk to you about our obsession with capturing exhibitions.
Thank you, and thank you for attending this event, which is very dear to us. It feels as though it's been a long time coming, and as Ben and Amy have already said, it's a huge pleasure to have sort of arrived at this stage somehow, and have witnessed some of the projects that Amy has cited, and been able to in some way be a part of backing them. And in a very small part, sometimes having a hand in sponsoring them. And so today is really an opportunity to look back and look forward with such pleasure. And kind of, as Amy said, it's been such a pleasure to watch our colleagues in this field. It started as an idea, hatched with Frances Corner, our previous college leader, and has developed enormously since. But when we started, it felt like a kind of imperative to specialise. And to notice something, and that something felt like a seismic shift in fashion exhibitions, their cultural position and their potential and their power. And it felt necessary to look at the language that was being used around this phenomena, that was on the one hand celebrating its sort of economic might, and at the same time, whilst doing that, it felt like obscuring its particular language. Words like blockbuster and glamorous, truly terrible words that hide research behind the apparent success being celebrated. And so the centre's been about looking at exhibitions as key critical primary sources. And one of the most important decisions I believe we've made at the Centre has been therefore to set up and launch the Exhibiting Fashion website that Ben mentioned a moment ago. It comes out of research, and its intention is to create a repository for what we mean by fashion exhibitions, and by doing so be able to track difference, progress, assumptions, developments, priorities as real cultural markers. And that by maintaining, for example, a document, the press release, for example, the changes in language accompanying these projects, and adding to the debate around them. What we want to recover, what we want to change, what we want to debate, what we want to distance ourselves from, etc. So photos have been recovered. As Ben said, it's 2,500 entries, and by close reading these, we're putting together what felt like a textbook. Amy and I, when we were running the course, regretted all the time not having what we wanted or meant by a textbook, reference material that would describe exhibitions in their totality. So recovering exhibitions became, as Amy said, our obsession, but it was about figuring out how to record them such that they might be primary sources, and how to close read whatever was left of as you know, always temporary exhibitions. So there was the aspect of creating a repository, but there's also an aspect, if you look on the website, under the name Responses, and we welcome responses to exhibitions that might be a poem, might be a painting, but that nevertheless close reads something about them. And so to restore something of the rhetorical power and the fine-tuned research that is our shared mission. So whilst we have critical mass on the website, there's still a huge task to keep it going. So today we're actually celebrating a relationship with UAV University in Venice. And I feel as a kind of sister organisation, they've been doing a huge amount of work in Italy that is very similar and indeed feeding into this project. So I've taught there due to their invitation under the leadership of Maria Luisa Frisa for 17 years. I know that because it's my son's age and I took him there as a baby, so I will always know how long I worked for UAV in Venice. And I'm particularly happy as I've benefited from rehearsing teaching this subject in not only two languages, but two discourses. One that was preoccupied so much and so closely with fashion design and harnessing the mood boards of their fashion designers in Italy when they had an opportunity to start their own curatorial department. So Dr. Gabriele Monti, who I'm about to hand over to, has been a constant inspiring colleague, a constant source of inspiration on the many visits to Venice over the years. His tireless work on the recovery of archival material in Italy and close reading of that material is really, truly extraordinary. We're incredibly delighted to welcome him to speak to us today, and I'll hand over to him now.
Thank you, Judith, for these words. I'm a little bit under some pressure. I feel very honored to be here and grateful, so thank you. Thank you, Amy de la Haye. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Caroline Stevenson. Thank you to the Center for Fashion Curation. Today is a day for celebration, and that's the reason of the title of my contribution. And Saul Marcadento, who is a researcher in Venice with me yesterday, told me, yeah, it's a little bit tacky, the title. And I said, well done, that's me, tacky and loud. Fine. He told me, yeah, but they will understand, because I wanted really to embrace the invitation, which is, again, I want to repeat it, a great honor to be here, to tell you what I have learned from the Center for Fashion Curation and the scholars, the people that work here, their research, their obsessions, their interests, their love, which has been very important for me as a researcher and for our university in Venice as well, as Judith was saying before. So I decided to use the verb learn instead of teach. I'm getting a little bit of my grammar in English, but I'm it's not a very good accent, but anyway, a little bit. I still remember something. And I wanted to use learn instead of teaching, because learning links everything to a place where you share things. It's what we do in the university. It's what is being done here with the students of the center and the researchers of the Center for Fashion Curation. It's what we do in Venice at our university. It's a place where there's a relational process, and it's not about teaching something, it's about learning together. And I think that this idea of sharing knowledge is also at the basis of the exhibiting fashion online archive, and that's the reason why I think it has not only a cultural but a political value, because it so much stresses the importance of inclusivity, of discussion, of having the chance to build something together, to share thoughts, and also have disagreements, which is totally fine. And so this is what I'm trying to in a way, highlight today and celebrate through 3 examples of what we have done. I say we because I never work alone. I work with the people that are with me at the university, with Judith Clark when she comes to Venice, thank God, very often. Not too often enough, but very often. And the students, and also Maria Luisa Frisa, which I feel should be here with us today, but she's curating an exhibition in Rome at the moment, which will open on November 25th of November. So she's working there, but she's a professor and a fashion curator, and she was, in her own way, a trailblazer in Italy, and pretty much in the same way as Judith was, and as the Center for Fashion Curation was. So her teaching curatorial practices in fashion at our university was very important to develop some of the things I will try to share with you today. Just a very simple, easy thing to share with you. I found this in my personal archive. I was talking about obsessions. So when I was younger, not that I'm old now, but I was younger, in 2005, 2006, 2007, I was doing my PhD in Italy, and fashion was not really a thing. You have to imagine that the degree course in which I work now, in which Judith was a professor in the very beginning, was founded in 2005. So it was not something that you would do in a university to say, I want to study fashion, and not even fashion exhibitions in a way. So I did my PhD in semiotics, and my professors in semiotics could not really understand what I was doing with fashion exhibitions. But what I was doing is I was visiting them and stealing pieces of exhibitions from my research. This was in the 2007 version of the Armani Retrospective at la Triennale, and I was obsessed with the fact that each single invisible mannequin by La Rosa was paired with a specific garment. You could not exchange mannequins. And that was amazing at the beginning. They were the famous invisible mannequins made for the Guggenheim retrospective that started in 2000. The Triennale was one of the last venues. And so that's what I did. I went inside one of the mannequins during my visit to the exhibition, and I stole one of these labels, because what was interesting for me was not simply telling what I was seeing when I was visiting an exhibition, which was what the semiotics would have loved me to do, try to describe the text from the lecturer, the visitor point of view, but I was interested in what was behind the exhibition, the processes, the ideas, the mistakes, probably, and the ideas that could be called even inventions. And I think that today we are celebrating some kind of at least for me, an anniversary, which is a multiple anniversary. I sometimes think that maybe it happens. Judith has done a lot of things with the 2004, 2014, and today is 2024. So maybe it's intentional, I don't know. But this was the exhibition that I went to see in Antwerp when it was still called Malign Muses and not Spectres, which was the London version. And that was the thing that I saw, and I said, I'm going to do my whole PhD dissertation on this, which could not be possible. Obviously, I put other things in. But the way this exhibition was conceived, and it's the idea of putting ideas in 3D, in a three-dimensional vision and version, and giving the exhibition design the same importance to the garment and to the objects, and considering an exhibition a place where you do not give answers but imagine questions, was truly trailblazing to me. And so that's one of the things that I think started my interest in this subject. And again, 10 years later, this book was another milestone. This is connected to the Center for Fashion Curation, and it is connected to the Exhibiting Fashion Online archive, because there was a contribution by Jeffrey Horsley, which in a way informed the idea of having the archive. But this is a book curated by Jaime de la Haye and Judith Clark. There was an amazing work on recovering the Beaton exhibition, and it was very important to me because it also put everything in a perspective. In 2004, again, This book was published by Lou Taylor, establishing dress history, working for the first time on collection inside museums, on exhibitions inside museums, and their relevance to the history of a discipline, which is very important to remember. Exhibitions connected to disciplines are very often the source to histories for that discipline, are the place where you build your knowledge. And that means also that you can forget certain things because you don't collect those things, you don't exhibit those things, and that's very important. But what was crucial in this book, it was, to me, very different and very, in a way, connected to the way of working of the Center for Fashion Curation and the people that are in here. It was that it has also a visual quality. It gave importance to images as well, and also in building new images. So recovering history, rediscovering histories was also a way to imagine in new ways, new questions, not only answers. And that was something that a few years before I had the chance to experiment when I was assistant curator for this exhibition in Venice, which was curated by Frisa, Maria Luisa Frisa, whom I mentioned before, and Judith Clark, which was not a retrospective on Brilliant, but it was more an exhibition on making exhibitions. It questioned what she did during her period at the Metropolitan. And in many ways, this is very much connected with the importance of the seminal exhibition that Beaton organized at the V&A in 1971. So what I'm going to do now, I should stop probably talking already, I've already said a lot of things, is stealing this way, which has become my way of studying exhibitions, because the exhibiting fashion online archive has this very recognizable browsing way with ears, which is amazing. So I've already done a little bit of celebration, 2004, 2014, 2024, and this is the first important date for me, because I think that the exhibiting fashion online archive has three great qualities for my work in the university and for my research, and I believe for the research and the work of many other scholars that are interested in fashion. From the first level is the idea of research, and in the sense of creating new knowledge. And creating new knowledge for me is always connected to imagining new questions. Making things a little bit more complex, not so easy. The second level is designing, exhibition making. This is the exhibiting fashion online archive is an amazing tool to imagining new things that were not thought of before, which is what Obrist in Ways of Curating was suggesting, the idea of the exhibition that has not been done, yet been done, or I'm putting the adverb in the wrong place, but I think you understood what I'm trying to say. And the third level is education, which is what we do in the university, but in a way, as I was telling you before, thought of as a place where a relational process is ongoing. So an exchange between students and professors and lecturers and practitioners. So an idea of an open space. And I think that these three levels are the levels that are perfectly embodied in the exhibiting fashion online archive. This first date I suggest in the first example I'm going to say something about is a research that I did a few years ago, because 1971 was very important. The Beaton exhibition has been seminal. And then I've always read about this exhibition that was happening a few years, actually 1 year before, in 1970. So my obsession was trying to understand what had happened before Beaton and before Vreeland, not forgetting what was happening also in Italy. And so what I did for the first, as a first thing, was to move the 1 to a 0 and go back 1 year, because in that specific moment, a great interest in exhibiting fashion was in a way brought up by different museums in different places. And probably this is also connected to the fact that the couture system was getting into a crisis. It was not so relevant anymore. And so it became something that belonged to a few people. It could become something that you could tell a story about. It could become part of a storytelling. And that's also informed many of the collection of the museums, which started acquiring garments that came from the couture system instead of, for instance, everyday dress and garments. And this was a very important exhibition. It was called Balenciaga Handmeister der Haute Couture, which was organized at the Museum Bellerive in Zurich, which was a museum connected. It was the design museum, a part of the design museum in Zurich, and it was connected to the School of Design, which has also inside, and that was also interesting for me, a fashion design school in which students were taught how to become designers, practitioners. And this was very important to me because it clearly was in direct connection with the very important retrospective that Brilliant organized in 1973, 1 year after being appointed special consultant at the Costume Institute of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And that's the reason why I add this cover. It's because this poster was designed. That was very interesting for me. I wanted to know more. So I went into the archive of the Zurich Design Museum, and I discovered that the poster was designed actually by a very important graphic designer, Gerard Miedinger, which is the brother of the better-known Hans Miedinger, which is the designer that invented the Helvetica font. And he was in charge of designing the poster, but he was also in charge of designing the exhibition, even if it was not called an exhibition maker or a designer, it was more called an organizer. But he was the one who was in charge of pretty much the display of the whole exhibition. And this exhibition was always spoken about, talked about in every book, in everything. I had never seen an image of the exhibition. I did know nothing about the exhibition, and I was very interested in the processes behind the building of this exhibition, because it was completely and entirely devoted to Balenciaga, which was still alive. But it's a very interesting thing, because generally you imagine a retrospective not done about someone who is still living, and then the Yves Saint Laurent retrospective by Vreeland, a huge problem. And so we had to wait a long time to have a retrospective on a living designer. But this was a really important retrospective, because what was exposed was garments. The original idea was exposing garments that had an everyday quality. Because the collection was a desire of the fashion school, not of the museum. They wanted to acquire, actually they asked Gustav Zumsteg, because it was at the head of the Abraham textile factory in Zurich, which was a very important factory that provided fabrics, silk fabrics, to the greatest part of the couture houses in Paris, and also invented things for them. For instance, the famous Gazar, it was designed by Abraham together with Cristobal Balenciaga. What the school asked Zumsteg, who was based in Zurich, was to make a contact with the house of Balenciaga to acquire some of the garments at a lesser cost, because in 1968 the Maison, the Balenciaga fashion house, was closing. So that was the reason why the school said, he is such an important designer, couturier actually, we need to have some of these things inside the so-called, what we would call today, study collection of the fashion school. And that's what they did. They acquired this garment. But when the museum understood that a retrospective devoted to Balenciaga could be useful to inaugurate this new venue of the Design Museum, they totally put aside the everyday amazing garments and decided to go for different loans from socialites, because what they were using as an idea of an exhibition was something that could be more spectacular and less didactic. And the head of the fashion school, which was called Verena Bischofberger, writes a note in 1970 at the beginning of the exhibition, calling it a lost occasion because they decided not to emphasize the design element in the garments and the construction by Balenciaga. Instead, they decided to make something more spectacular and enjoyable. So that, again, starts a sort of debate between giving attention to the object or recreating an atmosphere, being a curator who does not want to deal with the technical elements that he put in an exhibition, and a conservator who wants to know everything about the objects, who want to understand them, and also want to explain them. Putting fashion not very much inside the art world, but more in connection to the design culture, a specific discipline with practices and way of doing things. So in a way, what happened in this exhibition was pretty much something that went on for many years. And it was interesting for me discovering that the debate we're still discussing about today when we work on exhibition was present pretty much in this very first example, which, by the way, uses many of the Vreeland ideas about making an exhibition, and also some of the amazing visions by Beaton and Michael Haynes, the Chappie aluminum-coated mannequins to make everything graphic and more contemporary and less near the human body, so that you were looking at something different, not simply thinking, oh, I could wear that, oh, I like that, which is the very first thing you could say when you visit a fashion exhibition. It seems too close to the body that you can have an opinion. But that idea of focusing on the objects and on the discipline and creating something that is more atmospherical, spectacular, it's something that is still an issue nowadays in fashion exhibition, and it represents, in a way, also a rift between a certain way of curating and another one. And sometimes it's interesting, I think that's what this kind of exhibition tells us, is what we can do now, what is the opportunity that we can have now, deciding probably to find new ways exactly of curating. And this brings me directly to the second example I brought you. There's a lot more that I could tell you about the exhibition in Zurich. I loved reading the letters and the Vreeland letters who wanted the films because they had this amazing intuition of using Tom Kublin's films and images in the Zurich exhibition. And Vreeland, who did not see the exhibition, talked to Hubert de Givenchy, who went to see the exhibition, and then wrote, I want the movies and I want the images because I want the entertaining part of the exhibition also in New York. So it's a wonderful place in which a lot of things happen. And I don't know if they know, but in the Zurich archive they have the original Vreeland letter with the original signature. It's beautiful. I did not steal the letter as I did for the Armani thing. This is just a photo. No, I've changed during the years. I'm a better person now. I am really. But this brings me to the second example, which is another important, to me, obviously not absolutely important, work that I did a few years ago in 2018, 2019, because there was a journal in Italy that was working on the 80s of the past century, obviously, as a very important decade. And it was for fashion a very important decade, which opened with a very important exhibition in 1980, which was called 1922-1943, 20 years of Italian fashion. And this was an exhibition I had never seen images of published. I knew nothing about the processes of the exhibition, but we all knew the catalog. We all bought the catalog. We all know who the curator was, Grazietta Butazzi, a very important conservator, a fashion historian, one of the true beginners of everything in Italy. unluckily already dead. But her collaborator, which was the director of the Museo Pol di Pezzoli, Alessandra Mottola Molfino, still alive, so I had the chance to talk to her, an amazing person. I fell totally in love with her. And it's wonderful when you find these people, and I really want to make them talk, because we must not lose their memories and what they remember about things. I think that's fair. Even if the memories are a little bit blurred and not perfectly correct, who cares? We should always take care of these people and their knowledge. And so I went to the Museo Pol di Pezzoli and I told them, I want to see if you have materials on this exhibition. And I found a lot of things. Not only the original drawings by the architect Takashi Shimura, who is still working now and teaching scenography in Milan nowadays, and was a collaborator also of Gaia Aulenti, which told us how they designed the space of the museum, which was a private house owned by Giacomo Pol di Pezzoli and donated to the Milan city. So it was not built to be a museum, as it happens a lot in those days. And so he designed an old structure for the exhibition in which they put mannequins, drawings, posters, different levels in exhibiting the garments. And a great work was done in finding those materials, because those 20 years, 22-43, is the fastest period in Italy, which is clearly a very complicated one to deal with. From an historical perspective, you have to think that we are in 1980, so it's not something easy to deal with, but it's actually the 20 years in which the Italian fashion system, in a way, was born and was put into shape. So that was a seminal period to understand something on the culture of Italian fashion. And so Grazietta Butazzi did an amazing job in looking for garments from museum, collections, private people. There was no such thing as vintage at the time, but there was already, thank to God, Anna Piaggi and Vern Lambert. So they did a huge work in putting together everything and also creating a system of lenders that were all the fashion houses that were still present at the time. So in the archive of the Museo Pol di Pezzoli, there are folders of these letters with all the most important Italian fashion brands. And it's very interesting to see the kind of work that they did, because this exhibition wanted to become the beginning for a fashion museum in Milan. That was the subtitle in the catalog, and that was very interesting for me, because that was a very important moment, the 80s, to have this kind of enthusiasm about fashion culture and about the idea that it was necessary to build and design and create a museum for Italian fashion. So important that they organized an amazing conference for a fashion museum. It was an international conference, and I love this conference because I had the picture of all the fashion ladies, as I call them. You see them here. Stella Blam, Valerie Mendes, Yunkanai. It's beautiful. There were the pictures, and I love that. It's beautiful. They were all present at this conference, because what Grazietta Butazzi, Alessandra Mottola Molfino, the Municipality of Milan, the Association of Fashion Entrepreneurs wanted to do was to understand what meant to build a fashion museum, what was necessary to do. And so these were very technical and beautiful papers that simply told the story of how the museum was born, how the collection was built, how things were acquired, and also the things that were invented to preserve these materials from getting destroyed or getting dispersed. So this was a very seminal, again, moment. This was a very important exhibition, not just for the exhibition in itself, but for all the things that this exhibition made relevant at that very specific moment. I think this is the best slide, actually. So let's go back to the fashion ladies, which is like, sooner or later we will have to do a book on the great fashion, the first ladies of fashion. So I think it's very important. They should all be together. I love that. I am a huge fan. So this is not just important for the exhibition in itself, but for the idea of creating a museum for fashion, which is something that in Italy happened a little bit, but not so much, never really resolved. So we're, in a way, what I was suggesting in the article I wrote about this exhibition is that we are a little bit still there. But also the idea of creating professions. I had the chance to speak to Alessandra Mottola Wolfino, which was at the time the director of the Museo Pol di Pezzoli, but also to Francesco Pertegato, who was a very, at the time, young restorer who had studied at the V&A how to restore textiles. And he was, together with Alessandra Mottola Wolfino and Grazietta Butazzi, working as a group to do the exhibition. So you had the director of the museum, the curator, and the restorer, conservator, with a team of people that came from the most important couture fashion houses in Milan, because they invented solutions, how to restore specific garments, how to mount them on mannequins. It was really a moment in which they invented professions and ideas for exhibition making, for displaying fashion. And so this was a wonderful occasion for me, and the real amazing chance I had to put to work this research was when Judith Clark and Maria Luisa Frisa had the idea of organizing this exhibition, Memos on Fashion in this Millennium, which was an exhibition curated by Maria Luisa Frisa with the exhibition making by Judith Clark. It was a very interesting way of putting ideas, visual ideas, and sometimes very impulsive visual ideas. This is Maria Luisa. She thinks we have to say something about what's happening now in fashion. I want to do something with that designer. I think those garments could look good. And Judith Clark worked on the exhibition making, the display of the exhibition in 3D, which meant designing elements that were props for the mannequins that quoted the hairstyles of the 1980 exhibition, but also working on the idea of the reenactment of the 1980 exhibition. So what Judith Clark decided to do was to put a model of the design by Takashi Shimura, but also on the ground floor a replica of the exhibition, which actually had the garments that are still stored in the Milanese collection of fashion, which was the one that were acquired and preserved for the 1980 exhibition. And what is very interesting for me here, it's not just making a new exhibition referencing an old one, but also that this constant and very important relationship that you have between quotation, citing something, and inspiration, which is a double movement that is so relevant for fashion, and it can be made really relevant through an exhibition project like this one. The exhibition was beautiful in the way it put together contemporary fashion with the collection of the museum. So it was not just a way to reference the 1980 exhibition by Grazietta Butazzi, but also to highlight the museum in which the exhibition was inserted. And it was a dialogue. It was actually a conversation. And what I like very much about the work of Judith Clark is that she often uses linguistic words to define her 3D work in fashion, allusions, conversations, and I like that because it means that there is a thought that then gets to have a 3D evidence, becomes something, and it doesn't give you an answer, but it makes you stop and ask and try to have a reflection. This was a beautiful exhibition in the sense that you could go and visit the museum and you could even not see, if you wanted, the exhibition. And at the same time, you could question the exhibition inside the museum. And there were beautiful and so delicate elements. This was a wonderful element that Judith put at the beginning of the first floor. And it was a maquette, a model of a framework. These are the frameworks. It was clearly not an original one, but it was an allusion to the frameworks that in the museum are so important, and that are also the means through which we decide to give evidence to an element, and we also put him on display besides another one. So it was also, I would say, a museological reflection. And again, it was very subtle, very delicate, put in a place in the exhibition in which you could see if you wanted it. You could even ignore it. It was not important. And I think that that's a very interesting way of creating a new exhibition, working on so much archival material. And I think, again, this is what I was saying before, that idea of designing new ways of designing an exhibition, imagining an exhibition that has not yet been done, and in this case, starting from something that has so much history in it and so many references. I'm trying to move toward the third example, which is very dear to me. I generally, I always bring things with me. It's like props. It's what Judith does in the exhibition, and I have props with me. It's easier to talk. You can move. You can look cool with things. No, but this is another year that was important for me. It's 2022 because we decided. Maria Luisa had an idea, Frisa, during one of the last year of her teaching. So this is the educational part, I would say, of the exhibiting fashion online archive. She was doing, for one of the last years, her teaching in curatorial practices in fashion. And we decided to use the exhibiting fashion online archive as a tool for the students. So we built this publication with them, which was called Caramora Ti meriti un museo, which is Dear Fashion, You Deserve a Museum, which was a review, the title of a review of the Butazzi exhibition in 1980. And what we did with the students was to create an exercise in which they all took one of these very important exhibitions, which were a selection. We made a long list of all the most important Italian fashion exhibitions, mostly connected to the, I would say, second half of the 20th century, because we had to find limits for the student to work. And every single student took the exhibition and went to the museum, the private collector, the person who was in charge of the exhibition design, the lenders, anything they could find to develop descriptions of these very important exhibitions, also with images and a very short text that was very important for us, which was the methodology, what they did to do their research. And that is another thing that I want to stress about the exhibiting fashion online archive, is the importance that it gives to images and descriptions and words. The keywords are very important, and there is an awareness in the archive about the fact that words change, their meaning change, the way we use them change a lot, and we need to be aware of that. We have to do a work on that. We should not ever delay what was done before, but we must be aware of what is going on and how we speak our contemporary times through fashion, and now also how we speak fashion, actually. And I think that was very important because it was an exercise in finding words to describe something that was distant in time but was still relevant now. And I think that this movement is very important. Fashion is very good at doing it without explaining it too much, but I think that this way of working is a way of making that evident also for researchers, students, and practitioners. And these are some of the exhibitions that we worked on with the students. This was a very important exhibition in Prato, which put together for the first time in 1982 fashion, art, and design. It was a beautiful, and it was dispersed all over Prato, a great exhibition. This was another important exhibition. We have Antonio Masciarello from the the archive, the Gianni Versace archive, he gave us also materials about this exhibition, which is a less known exhibition about the work of Gianni Versace, mostly about the drawings connected to his work. This was the amazing Gaia Aulenti exhibition devoted to La Sala Bianca. This is La Regola Estrosa, Settembrini Malossi in Florence on Italian menswear. Pitti was very important. I mean, we did a lot of work on some, not all, because it was a single teaching, not a whole year. But I think we did an amazing job. And we were very lucky because Judith wrote us a preface to this publication, because we wanted to stress the importance that the work of the Center for Fashion Curation and the exhibit in Fashion Archive had to let us imagine this kind of work. And what was very impressive to me, and still is nowadays, is the fact that for young students, making memories is very important. Remembering things or trying to find ways to remember things is very important. They are very much interested in this kind of research because clearly it gives them ideas to imagine and design new things. You have to think that we are a university which is very fashion design based. It's not about history. It's not that kind of university. They want to become fashion designers. They want to work in factories, enterprises. It's not in design studios. It's not about becoming researchers. Some of them do, but not. We have one here, Marta Franceschini, but not all. Most of their colleagues are working in fashion, and it's a little bit Italian people in London today. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. The other thing that we did was to put together a visual archive, and this is where the design part of our students came up, because it was not simply putting together all the materials we had found during the research, but it was reworking them. So clearly we had references to these materials, but they were reworked as if this became a sort of a mood board for an exhibition that wasn't yet done, or for a museum, an Italian museum, that has not been done yet. And clearly you understand that it's quite an obsession of mine and of Maria Luisa as well. But the fact that the review of the Buttazzi exhibition was Dear Fashion, You Deserve a Museum, and we're still there, it's amazing. And I'm going to close. I'm not talking too much anymore, or, well, yes, a little bit, just to say a few things, because I have arrived to 2024, which can be also 2024, it's easier to say. And as I was saying before, Maria Luisa is working now, so Maria Luisa Frisa cannot be with us today because she's working at the Maxi, because she will open an exhibition there soon, which is called Memorabile, memorable. And we decided even not to translate in English. We left the Italian title for the English version of the publication of the catalog as well. And this is an exhibition that focuses on how fashion makes things memorable, but not only. And she asked me to write a text which I called With No Memory, Senza Memoria, because I made a reflection of the importance of fashion exhibitions on helping us developing a memory. And not only the importance of fashion exhibitions, the importance of finding spaces where to organize fashion exhibition, when to collect and discuss them, because they help us in having memories and not forgetting. And that, to me, is very important, and still in Italy a very huge thing, having institutional places in which you can preserve, collect, and display fashion, so you do not forget the relevance and the importance of those materials. But I cannot clearly end my speech with quoting myself. That would have been tacky, Saul, not the title. That would have been, I was thinking, well, I'm going to quote myself with a still an unpublished thing. So, I mean, this is really amazing. No, I'm going to do something different, slightly different. I'm going to put together 3 very important people that have shaped my research and I believe shaped the way we work in our university in Venice. One of them is Richard Martin, which to me still is and will always be the most brilliant fashion curator and critic. Everything I read, something that he has wrote, it could have been written yesterday. I'm obsessed with him, and I'm gonna read you a very simple thing that he wrote in this. This is a beautiful poem. It was very cute. I'm clearly in love with him. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. This was a picture that was taken by Gerard Jurkovic for the Bomb magazine when he was doing his exhibition, the 1988 exhibition Fashion and Surrealism, as he was given a preview of the next exhibition, which was the historical mode. And he says something interesting in his interview. He says, he's answering to a question. I think that Galliano is a good example of the clothes that we will be showing in our historical mode show. He's talking about the next show, which opened in 1999. It will appear in italic to be a survey of fashion, but in fact everything will have been done in the 1980s, and the idea is that it's a play on historicism. And what I'd like to suggest in that exhibition is that history is such an evident force with contemporary fashion designers as it is for artists, as it is for architects, that they're really demonstrating their acuity to history, picking up in some cases almost entire garments, in other cases motifs out of their knowledge of history, and use it in a contemporary way. Indubitably, fashion designers have always done this to some degree, often with a kind of negative connotation about it being a knockoff. In this case, I think it's very much the idea of appropriation that we have in contemporary art. And what he says at the end of this short interview is, it's not that objective sense of history as being embodied object in the past, but it's history in some way inflected by the present. And I love this idea of working with history and making an exhibition that was called Historical Mode, using history in this way. I think that Richard Martin would have loved the exhibiting fashion online archive. I think he would have loved the way it plays and uses history, memories, and I think that in a way there's a connection. The other reference I want to make at the end of my speech is to a trailblazing essay to me for my studies that was written by Hemi de la Haye in 1996 for this publication, Making Histories in Museum, because it's the essay in which she describes the work that she did for the street style exhibition, which was a trailblazing one after the 1971, because it changed the perspective of acquiring clothes that was just not couture clothes, but became everyday life clothes, garments, uniforms of the subculture. So it changed a perspective of what we should preserve inside a museum of fashion and dress. And it's a beautiful description of the processes. I still give it to my students nowadays, and it was very important for me when I did my PhD, because it says a lot about describing and telling histories. I think that's what she says, it's very important. She says, as curators with a central concern for objects, their interpretation and presentation within museums, we embarked on constructing a history of subcultural clothing with some trepidation. And it's beautiful the fact that she used the word constructing, because it's not the history, it's not the correct one. It's one possible history, but you have to start from somewhere. You have to do, you have to take a risk, and that's the only way to make a memory present. And so she talks about the advisors that they interviewed during the process of acquiring the actual uniforms of subcultures. And she ends the essay saying another thing that to me it's very important. By staging this exhibition, which was a huge success, by the way, it has been suggested in the media that the V&A had signaled the end of street style. And she says, it is said that many commentators should only associate museum with historical objects and not recognize that they are also actually face the ongoing challenge of collecting the here and now. And this is, again, another way of working with history, of making history inside the museum, telling a story, taking the risk of telling a story. And this is, and I'm going to end, and then I won't say another word, because I thought about this yesterday, about Judith Clark's obsession with Vreeland when we were doing the Vreeland exhibition in 2012, and the way she had this mannequin pictured in the Yves Saint Laurent catalog by Duane Michaels with this calico and this way of packing these bodies and this idea of creating an atmosphere around these amazing pieces. And I like this because Judith uses these references when she works on exhibitions. She reenacted this. She evokes them, alludes to them, but she also wrote what I think is a very interesting essay on the work of Vreeland that was published in 2011. I'm doing the dates, so it's my personal exhibiting fashion online archive. In 2011, from the Eye Has to Travel book that was written on Vreeland, which was called Restyling History, because that's what she did in a way at the Costume Institute. And I think that this idea of not simply giving you the real story, the only one, but telling it and putting something around it, but taking the risk to tell it, that story is a very important thing. And I think this is what happens in the work that has been done here at the Center for Fashion Curation during these years, and for the Exhibiting Fashion Online archive. And I want to add another word, and I will thank you so very much for this. You don't know how happy I am today that I'm so, I had to say it, I'm saying it at the end, so it's not tacky anymore. It shouldn't be tacky anymore. Thank you very much.
We have a couple of minutes for questions. We're going to have to be tight with timing. We need to start on the dot at, I think it's 3 o'clock for our rapid-fire conversations. Does anyone have a question now? We will also have drinks at the end of the day. I think at 6:30 upstairs. We'll be shepherding those of you who can join us for a drink later on. You're more than welcome to approach any of the speakers then and talk to them about their ideas. Any questions for now? No? Okay. Let's have a break. We'll reset the room. Thank you very much, Gabriele. A cigarette break. just for Gabriele. Yes, what we might actually want to do is start at 5 to 3. Please be back here at 5:02.
Will be.
There are toilets just back up to the top of the lecture hall, curl around, and they're underneath the stairs. And there is the cafe just above us as well. Thank you very much. See you at 5 to 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We're being tight with time because there are a few speakers who need to catch trains, etc., throughout the rest of the afternoon. So this is a rapid-fire session of 1 hour and a quarter. 5 people who are all centre members, Centre for Fashion Curation, and they're approaching this conversation around exhibiting fashion and recapturing histories from different perspectives. Some of it may be about the process, but some of it may all be the impetus, the original impetus of why they got into curating and why they got into recapturing and reflecting on histories. All of the speakers will introduce themselves very briefly and then just talk for 15 minutes or so. Okay, our first speaker is Amy. Take it away. Turn yourself on, Amy.
Thank you. I'm going to do something I've not done before today. For 35 years I've worked in museums and I've written about objects and interpreted objects, and now I'm experimenting by talking to them, partly because I obsess on them and I do feel they're mine and I do get to know them. These narratives are going to form a series of podcasts that is going to be produced by LCF's Alex Marshall, and I'm also hoping to use this format for some exhibition displays and all creative writing output. For instance, there's an album of watercolour designs by a designer who I love and have done loads of work on in the archive here, called Victor Stiebel from the 1960s, and it's really frumpy, and he was absolutely amazing, and I want to write a letter and pack it away with the album and say, don't overlook me, because my designer was amazing, and I want to start sort of doing that sort of intervention. So I've got three narratives. They're loosely united by their relationship to the soil, because a lot of the work I've been doing has been about the land, and the soil is obviously a non-renewable resource upon which all life depends. Gabriele, thank you. I didn't know you were going to say that, and I was deeply touched, but it works seamlessly. On your right, New Age travellers' leather boots worn by Fraggle, a member of the Dongas tribe, early 1990s. I first met you in 1993. You were part of a head-to-toe outfit worn by Fraggle. You worked hard supporting her feet to climb trees in the Forest of Dean to halt the bulldozers. Even before you arrived at the V&A for my street style exhibition, you were regarded as subversive objects. I expected designers to donate when I exhibited their work. This was before they all had archives. But I insisted that you, along with about 100 other head-to-toe subcultural outfits, compiled and worn by one person, were purchased. This meant the accounts department required an invoice, but your owner had an assumed name, no fixed address, couldn't be contacted by telephone, and didn't have a bank account. Fortunately, this project engaged many of the museum's non-curatorial staff, and so, after some persuasion, they circumvented civil service bureaucracy and provided cash up front. Once you arrived at the museum, you continued to provoke. When I placed you in the storeroom where objects waiting formal documentation were temporarily housed, my historic textile colleagues were furious. They feared that you would contaminate their lace and embroidered silks. Objects that in my mind were no more precious than you. In fact, you were much, much harder to acquire and remain objects of the greatest rarity. Once you were accessioned, I met with conservation colleagues who were genuinely interested in the challenges you proposed. I argued that, of course, your soil terraces were integral to your objectness and a vital part of your biography, and this prompted intriguing debates. If we let you retain your soil, why do we so routinely cleanse an 18th century dress that is considered soiled? It was you who prompted the conference at the Museum of Mankind that posed the question, sacred dirt? You've been stored separately from the main fashion collection for over 30 years now. I'm pleased to learn there's a resurgence of interest in you. Has any of your soil dropped off? If so, has it been gathered tenderly by gloved hands and placed within an inert Melanex conservation bag in the same way that an errant sequin might be safeguarded? And if not, why not? Artist unknown, seed picture, set within an ebonised frame, mid-18th century, to be exhibited as part of our touring exhibition called Uncommon People, Folk Culture in Wessex, which opens at Swindon Museum on the 30th of November. Posted on Instagram the 17th of April 2024, the day we met. Hello, I've never met anyone quite like you before. I want to spend longer getting to know you. You gorgeous, bizarre to my eyes, Darby and Joan folk culture gem. From where do you hail? Who crafted you from plant material in around 20 different seed types? Why and when precisely? Did they make you for their own pleasure, or as a gift, or even a commission? Was your maker one of the uncommon people, or a woman of leisure? How did you spend your life before you were acquired by the Countess of Pembroke, and finally by one of my favourite Wiltshire-based female studio potters? Where did they place you within their domestic, or in the case of Catherine Plador-Bouverie, professional spaces? How were you valued and described to others? And what is your biography since you entered the context of Wiltshire Museum? They certainly wanted you very much. In 1997, grants were secured to purchase you. By then, your historical and financial worth had shifted dramatically. No longer part of everyday life and lived experience, you've become an object of interpretation. You mostly live in a box in the store. Who are your neighbours? How often do you get out? What do they say? I dearly hope you'll approve of the stories we plan to tell. Happily back in the museum conversing with objects, and of course Simon Costin and Melanie Robinson from the Museum of British Folklore. Oops. Oh, that's it. Marguerite, by the artist known as J.J. Grandville, loose, hand-coloured engraved plate, published in Le Fleur Animé, 1847, the year the artist died. Garden daisy, Marguerite in French, surely you must be the flower most violated in the name of love. After splicing your fine stems with our fingernails to rip you from your roots, we humans routinely pluck your petals, one by painful one, in search of an answer to the perennial question whether they love me or love me not. In the popular sentimental language of flowers published in France in 1819, aimed at predominantly white bourgeois women, you are ascribed qualities of innocence, purity, and loyal love. It seems to me that it's at times when patriarchal societies most fear the women question that females are most commonly likened to flowers, as seemingly passive, immutable, static, delicate, ideally beautiful and reproductive. But here you are portrayed as a humanoid, a woman-like flower about to maliciously dissemble one of your own. Your soil is parched and a storm is brewing. Marguerite, your artist was surreal before surrealism. Your narrators, Taxil Delford and Alphonse Carr, visionaries. You are amongst the troop of flowers who protest that whilst you have long provided humans with beauty, fragrance and poetic metaphors, we've simply repaid you with our secateurs. Together you demand to leave the soil and experience the world of humans. And Gronville costumed you in the most splendid, taxonomically correct floral haute couture to make your debut. Daisy, you are a wildflower, one who grows freely without human intervention. Your narrator warns you never to imitate those flowers who lead a life of luxury in the garden. But even those from the fragrant hawthorn tree can fall prey to the pruner, a steel instrument of torture comprised of two jaws and a throat, whose master is the gardener. But Marguerite, your torture is surely more cruelly protracted. Indeed, your narrator castigates humans for scalping, snipping, and flaying alive white daisies. Compositionally, you resemble a fashion plate, although the spaces you occupy are very different. On the left is a botanical plate from 1796. Compositionally, you resemble a fashion plate, although the spaces you occupy are very different. However, you are neither style statement nor fairy tale protagonist. You are a prophetic and sophisticated work of social satire. Your artist and narrator are harsh critics of fashionable society, the sentimental cult of flower books, the pharmaceutical perfume industry, botanical colonialism, and, unusually for men, the subjugation of women. Indeed, they comment that men treat women as the latter treat the daisy. They also abhorred the scientific cultivation of flowers in order to provide, like fashions in dress, an ever-changing array of colour, texture and form to whet human desire. They write, by culture, daisies become double and a white, red, pink stripes, etc. Yet notwithstanding these metamorphoses, the daisy is content with very little. Some good fresh soil is all it wants. And as early as 1847, they alerted their readers to the alarming extinction of flower species, all issues that resonate so strongly today. Marguerite, the ground upon which you are printed, the paper bookplate, has, rather like the fate of the flower in your hand, been ripped apart from the whole. You were more profitable sold individually than as part of an extant publication, and or maybe your book was damaged and you were salvaged. I bought you on eBay in 2019. I can't remember what I paid, probably about £25. I was searching for your artist's depictions of wild and cultivated roses for my exhibition at the Museum of Fashion Technology in New York, and book called Ravishing the Rose in Fashion, and I'd already obsessed on daisies for a project by Judith Clark. And, as a person born with the collecting gene, I felt it was my duty to rescue you. I knew you would earn your keep, and naturally you've rewarded my confidence. You've become central to a project for Dio, exploring how the haute couture's garden and love of flowers informed his designs, and how they in turn have been hybridized by his design successors. Dio has often been quoted saying that his ideal clients were flower-like women. For the forthcoming exhibition catalogue at Musée Dio, I have contextualised and analysed this statement in the context of women like flowers in art and literature, which is where you came in. But I'm not filing you away just yet. I've started to read about radical botany, in which it's argued that plants, of course, are not just objects of human manipulation, but are active participants. And I have a strong feeling that you and your type are my future research. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Caroline Stevenson and I'm a member of the Centre for Fashion Curation. My presentation is a series of personal and theoretical reflections on friendship and solidarity in curatorial work. And it positions friendship, collaboration and exchange as part of an ongoing but also growing tendency within fashion practice towards doing things together or not going it alone. Yes, my presentation is about friendship and solidarity in curatorial work. So my curatorial practice has developed not from the professional structures of a museum or a gallery, but rather through years of working within artist-led networks and through close collaborations with artists, designers, and creative institutions. Conceptually, I locate my practice within an emerging field of critical fashion knowledge, and I aim to question the boundaries of fashion as a discipline and what it means to practice fashion. I work through transdisciplinary frameworks and methodologies that cross the fields of fashion and contemporary art, and my work draws parallels with Rosalind Krauss's spatial concept of an expanded field of sculpture, or a way of working within a discipline through an expanded set of positions. I consider my practice to be contextual, and I work collaboratively to create what I call curatorial situations, which include residencies, exhibitions, publications, events, talks, and interventions. Claire Docherty writes that these are projects that aim to reimagine place as a situation, which could be a set of circumstances, a geographical location, a historical narrative, a group of people, or a social agenda. For example, this is a publication that I co-edited with Ruby Hoet that forms part of our collaborative project Modus. And Modus is the project that I'm most occupied with at the moment. It's a curatorial and research platform that brings together an international collective of artists, designers, writers, and researchers whose practices interrogate the boundaries of fashion as an idea, as an industry, and a discipline. And it evolved out of conversations that Ruby and I were having about the role of criticality in fashion practice and a shared desire to operate differently within our field, me being an outsider coming from the contemporary art world, and Ruby having trained as a fashion designer working within a critical, research-based context. Around the time that we were having these conversations, we were also observing the emergence of other fashion practitioners who shared our interests. However, we could see that these practices were often isolated, they were lacking in community and also legitimacy within mainstream fashion. So we established Modus as a project that would connect them and create a shared dialogue between them. We weren't interested in positioning Modus simply in opposition to commerce or industrial fashion. Rather, we wanted to cultivate a periphery where new collaborations and practices, new vocabularies, and new ideas could sit. So we imagined our project as a multivocal space where a range of approaches to fashion could mutually and productively inform each other. Often in the field of fashion, practices that fall outside of the rigid frameworks of commerce and industrial production or that aren't legitimized by the conventions of standard museum exhibitions become categorized as art. But through Modus, we wanted to reclaim them as fashion, bringing their conceptual and critical concerns back into the folds of fashion discourse. So Ruby and I produced this publication together with the designer and artist Roland Brauchley during a residency at Onomatope in Eindhoven, where we transformed the gallery into an open editorial studio during Dutch Design Week. We worked really intensively over 7 days, establishing a critical context for Modus and creating this, which contains a series of essays from practitioners and theorists, as well as our own glossary of practices, which is an ongoing list of verbs that describe different ways of being, doing, and thinking fashion. The essays are positioned so that the publication has no end and no beginning, and our glossary weaves through them as a central thread. It's also designed to be used. It has pockets to hold things, and you can write on it. You can cut it up as well. So we view the format of the publication as a portable set of ideas and a way of putting the conceptual concerns of Modus out into the world. One of the essays inside, written by Ellen Sampson and Alexis Romano, talks about the impulse to create networks as an inherent part of professional and creative practice. In the essay, they discuss the network as a means of both containing and disseminating experimental, emergent, or unresolved thoughts and practices, as a way of creating spaces of uncertainty to challenge and push us ahead. They visualize the network as an actual net, so a textile that's formed through looping and knotting together chords and lines, each loop both connected to and dependent on the next. It's a metaphor for ways of working or for projects like Modus that mobilize networks, discussions, and collaborations as sites for the production of projects rather than fixed geographical spaces. And for projects that rely on the commitment and the dependency of people working in collaboration with each other to sustain and grow an idea without the formal roles and procedures involved with staging exhibitions in established galleries and museums. In the last 2 decades, projects such as Modus have been associated with the notion of the curatorial, a growing recognition that the triangular network of object, curator, and audience has been replaced by a spectrum of potential interrelationships. In fact, at the start of the curatorial, A Philosophy of Curating, the editors Eric Rogoff and Jean-Paul Martinon make a distinction between curating, or the gamut of professional practices that have to do with setting up exhibitions and other modes of display, and the curatorial, which views the exhibition and all that occurs intentionally and unintentionally around it as an event of knowledge in itself. The curatorial, as a conceptual framework, opens up the field of fashion curation to a multitude of contexts, methods, and positions that decenter authorship and allow us to question how we produce knowledge through the practice of exhibition making. It recognizes that the production of knowledge is one of collaboration, whether that be through collaborative processes or through situations that engage with audiences in different and unexpected ways. So Modus is a project that prioritizes collaborative practice, which, for me, is also a practice of friendship. It's sustained not only through a commitment to an idea, but also through a constellation of shared affinities, loyalties, and conversations that I have with Ruby and Roland and all of the practitioners that we work with. Ruby and I work in recognition of the fact that we individually bring something different to the project, but that the sum of our whole is bigger than what we could achieve on our own. We work in solidarity with each other and with a great amount of trust and confidence that we can carry the project individually and together. Celine Condorelli considers these kinds of friendships to be essential to cultural production. She calls them forms of support and writes that working together can both start from and create forms of solidarity and friendship, which are then pursued as both condition and intent, motivating actions taken and work undertaken. For her, friendship is most evident within the labor processes of artistic work, both a setup for working and a dimension of production, which she calls friends in action. Her writing is concerned with how we inhabit the idea of friendship and how this translates into an ethics of collaborative work, how we go about making intimate connections with issues and people that we work with, and how we create a closeness to something or someone. This closeness, she argues, is fundamental to the process of bringing art into the public realm. And for Condorelli, these kinds of friendships are inherently political. They are support structures that connect ideas and establish relationships with the common goal of making things public through a multiplicity of voices rather than one authoritative voice. And even although she works as a singular artist, she acknowledges that she speaks through the many references, friendships, and relationships that form her work. So inhabiting the position of a friend and adopting the ethical practices of friendship is, in my experience, key to sustaining any collaborative project. But I think there's more to it as well. In my experience, working collaboratively with my friends produces a momentous amount of happiness and joy. In fact, the feminist author Lynn Segal would describe these moments as radical happiness and collective joy that are found when we enter into relationships with other people's lives. Transformative joy means prioritizing the values of love, care, kindness, service, solidarity, and the struggle for justice, bringing people together through collective modes of organization and providing a space that recognizes the plurality of difference. These are spaces that create excitement, respect, and hope, and they are also the conditions needed to sustain our belief in creative practice as a transformative force in this world. Leaning into collaboration, inhabiting the lives and the creative practices of others, means also leaning into the unknown. It means relinquishing authoritative control and instead participating in ongoing dialogues and iterative processes without knowing where they might end. But it's also a productive place of unknowing, in the sense that Emily Ogden describes. If there is a kind of unknowing that could serve now, it is not the defensiveness of willful ignorance, but the defenselessness of not knowing yet. Can a person go back to the unpruned adjectives of immediate experience? Before one summed up this moment in history, what exactly was it? What, lying under the summary, what before the predator's eye confounded itself? What was it? What does it continue to be? When I talk about unknowing, I am not talking about the refusal to know what can be known, or about the simple accident of not having found something out yet, nor even, although this is warmer, about the fact that we will each absorb only a finite amount of knowledge in the course of our finite lives. Instead, I'm talking about a capacity to hold the position of not knowing yet, possibly of not knowing ever. For Modis, the capacity to hold a position of not knowing is central to the project. Ruby and I view Modis as a conceptual and a visual architecture that can be mobilized for different sites, different situations, and different contexts. It's a framework that brings together affinities, but also differences across a network of active social people who work together to transgress the borders of fashion through different meeting points. We work to validate fashion knowledge as a collective, participatory, and disruptive activity that can be made and remade in the here and now. Returning to the notion of the curatorial, Modis offers what Eric Rogoff would say, the ability to inhabit problems and open them up by asking questions, rather than tying them down to existing knowledge conventions. For me and Ruby, being able to work discursively and leaning into uncertainty means that rather than working through a process of preordained commitments, we can act in the moment as urgencies arise and as possibilities present themselves. Looking through the Modis network, it's clear to see an ongoing and expanding impulse to work collectively and discursively across many contemporary fashion practices. In my experience, at the heart of this impulse is the common bond of friendship. Friendship between individuals who believe in what they're doing, who happen to like each other, and who like working together. In closing, I just want to draw attention to the principles of collaborative work that defines Modis as a self-organized project that sometimes inhabits but does not exist within traditional galleries. This doesn't mean that we exist in opposition to or as an alternative to other fashion exhibitions, but as curators, we do need to remain critical of the neutrality of galleries and museums as central spaces for the production of fashion knowledge. They're not neutral, but they are part of a widening ecology of spaces, projects, and events that together represent the complexity of fashion as a cultural, political, and social practice. We need to collectively seek a curatorial language and discourse that allows us to enter into different territories and cross over into emerging terrains of fashion production. And we need more events like this one today where we can come together and share our methods and reflect on our processes. As the curator Lucy Steed says, within the field of exhibition histories, we may choose to write about fashion objects included in lavishly archived museum shows and biennales, but equally, even if they are only traceable orally, about remote installations and unannounced performances. We need to write plurally from diverse perspectives with different sets of expertise and varying standpoints. We need to question the unity not only of fashion, but of the public sphere, to challenge our definitions of fashion and of publics in order to better understand the multitude of overlapping situations we find ourselves in today. Thank you.
Hello. My name's Louise. I'm a PhD candidate, just in the process of writing up. And today I'm going to talk to you about the imagined dress. and particularly around the inaccessibility of that dress during COVID-19 and how I was going to evoke it through a new practice that emerged. So, and the evolution of a form of fictional writing, the object narrative. This was a form of writing that was popular in the 18th century and features a specific object as the protagonist, charting its life history through a human amanuensis. Established research practices, including material culture analysis, archival studies, were undertaken in 2020 to 2021. Had left absences amongst the traces of the history of the everyday dress being investigated. The object narrative offered a possible means to access the inaccessible for the researcher and the reader, imagining the dress using research already gathered amongst possible histories. The pink silk dress comes from a hybrid gathering of dress that I uncovered as part of a larger assemblage in 2012. The pink silk dress is an obsession that I've had since 2012, and you've heard that word quite a lot today, obsession, and is one of 177 items of dress uncovered dating from 1775 to 1980. Found in a store cupboard, it forms part of what we believe were dresses donated to the fashion department at Birmingham City University over many years, which includes several waves of donation. The pink dress is one wave of that donation, but it arrived with us with no documents and no provenance apart from its discovery in a store cupboard in the fashion department in Birmingham City University. Its status as unknown offered the opportunity to imagine what its lived biography might be, which alongside extant construction marks provided the stimulus for the emergence of possible fictive narratives. Beginning with the pink silk dress, I began to imagine what its history might be. Extant evidence of the original maker legible in the pink silk dress through marks of making. I'm a maker, so immediately I connected with the dress through those marks, alongside embodied knowledge gained through costuming, signalled the potential for the emergence of unheard narratives. Analysing the pink dress through material culture analysis and using embodied practices of cutting and repeating the construction, which the first maker employed in the construction of the original pink silk dress, gave access to narratives amplified to me through the making. The image here shows that practice in half scale, with the practice of making informing knowledge of the dress, but also of the first maker. Embodied knowledge gained through many years of practice and costuming, alongside the embodied research practice of fictional writing, acknowledged and used the ambiguities within the inquiry to evolve a creative research method. In giving the pink silk dress a voice, it became a character within its own life history, arousing empathy in the spectator, giving the object agency, and creating porous relations between the researcher, object, and spectator. The playful form of the object narrative offered an embodied research practice to evoke the absent objects, whilst permitting access to imaginary or possible histories. The above text was uncovered early on in my research, but at that early stage I had no idea if and how it might prove useful within my PhD. But once COVID-19 hit and my objects were locked in a cupboard and no longer accessible, the inaccessibility of my objects and the need to access them became more urgent. The practice of an object narrative materialised. It's important to note that writing is not my practice, or was not my practice. Imagination and imagining, yes. So, for the first foray into the writing was a clumsy and hesitant beginning. Again, I was in lockdown. I was on my own. Libraries were inaccessible, so immediately I had to find examples of object narratives. So I bought two examples, one from the 18th century, which is the history of and adventures of a lady's slippers and shoes written by themselves, and the other, the story of a needle. I'm sure you can't imagine why I chose both of those. Purchasing two of these original object narratives, one from the 19th century and one from the 18th century, gave two examples of the form of the object narrative across these two different periods. Using the method of the analytic memo, I started to evolve themes and keywords within the text to try to establish the form and tone of each of the object narratives. Reading around the subject of the object narrative, alongside the analysis, I became aware that each appeared to have a different audience. The history and adventures of a lady's slippers and shoes, a more adult audience, whereas the story of a needle had a younger audience in mind. Interestingly, both demanded to be heard. By that I mean demanded to be spoken. These were meant to be spoken, which was an interesting form that I'd selected coming from a theatre background, used to working with text and scripts. The performativity of the text proving to be significant later in the development of my practice. So I started to write an object narrative in the mornings, free writing, unsure of what I was doing, completely nervous and slightly terrified that it would be utterly dreadful and really, really disastrous. And the process of writing allowed me to evoke the dress that was absent within my practice. Gerber notes that the process of writing offers a methods to support the emergence, concretization, evaluation, revelation of imaginative ideas, which enabled me to explore the dress's possible lived biography. Bringing into view the interplay amongst the fictive, the real and the imaginary, the pink silk dress is conjured up for the researcher through anthropomorphosis. The first two chapters of The Adventures of the Pink Silk Dress, written by itself, were narrated and featured within a soundscape for Narratives of Dress, the Pink Silk Dress, an exhibition that I did in 2022. The object narrative was utilised alongside the recorded material culture analysis, stimulating a discourse between the object and the researcher, me, which the visitor to Narratives of Dress, the Pink Silk Dress, could witness. This dialogue renegotiated the contract for participation between the everyday pink silk dress and the spectator. Within my research inquiry, the use of extant dress and my specific version of the objects being investigated is biased by my practice as a maker costuming for performance. Thus, the authorial power is given to the source, the extant dress, the first maker, and the researcher who shares with the first maker the practice of bespoke making. Thus, the construction of the object's biographies is constructed using my own specific costumer's lens. Using these narratives, the research aimed to bring ideas into conversation with one another through the medium of biography and making is significant in the reading and reauthoring of the dress claimed in the PhD's title. As such, it is a construct. We've heard that before as well today. Generated by research methods, archival research and fictional writing to present plausible narratives of the dress being investigated. This plausibility is framed by embodied knowledge and experience of making costume for performance, which continues to remain predominantly a gendered practice. Similarly with the dress itself has a web of characters, some related to its production, farmers who produce the raw materials, textile designers, weavers, designers, sellers of the fabrics, purchasers, cutters and makers, which Anna Shanlin documents to astounding success in her portrait of a silk dress, documenting the story of a dress featured in a painting. Beyond the production of a single silk dress, there are the sellers and consumers, maybe models who wore the dress, seamstresses who may have altered the dress, and all of the various publics the dress would have come into contact with. With my objects of study, these are the additional parties who drew, copied and were inspired by the objects as they were located in a school of art. Those who accepted the objects into the institution and possibly even models or performers who wore them in fancy dress parties, which are known to have occurred at the School of Art. In short, the many biographies which are interwoven within the object are evocative and slightly out of reach in everyday dress, which offers opportunities to explore possible histories, which Virginia Woolf in Orlando offers such a biography, where the possible is explored amongst known history. Not that I'm comparing myself to Woolf, I'd just like to say. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Beginning the object narrative, I found that the initial process of writing flowed well, but the discovery by me helped to ground the story in the real, so I felt like I needed to start in what I knew and understood. Bear in mind, writing was not my practice. hoped that starting here, anybody reading the text would sense the real and trust me as the author to tell the story. Gradually, I realised that I needed to have more structure in the text and plan the Pink Silk's dress's journey through its life history, resulting in enrolment on a memoir and life writing course. This online course offered me the much needed tools to build the object narrative into something more than what it was. Providing an outline of the possible chapters gave the story's possible trajectory a structure. The example above evidence is where I started to evolve the chapters, again including chapters which the pink dress shared with me, and the real life history gave me confidence to push away from the real into the fictive, which you see with the dinner party as an early iteration. These beats in the silk dress's life are informed by research undertaken of the pink silk dress, including a similar dress featured in Frith's A Private View at the Royal Academy. So here we see the second iteration and final iteration of the object narrative. What was really significant to me in this research was the object could be heard and realised, often with everyday objects. Again, we've heard a lot about those today as well. They are often invisible, and with this object I was keen to make it visible but also to provide it with a voice, which is what I did in my exhibition. So I'm just going to show you one more slide as I round up. So interestingly, I've never completed that object narrative, but I have written another one which is completed. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming and thank you for the Centre for having me. My name's Dr. Leila Nasser-Al-Din and I'm a cultural producer here, working primarily in the exhibitions and curating them. I'm reading from my phone today. I'm not scrolling. The theme Recovering Exhibitions invites us to engage deeply with history, not only through its preserved fragments, but also by confronting its absences and the hidden potentials within what is often overlooked. To recover is not simply to retrieve or reconstruct the past, but to reanimate it in the present, unlocking possibilities that extend beyond mere remembrance. This process is akin to sublimation, where dormant memories and impulses are redirected into new forms that resonate with contemporary consciousness. In this way, recovery transforms preservation into an active dialectical process, bridging memory with the present and positioning history as an ongoing dialogue with our contemporary moment. In this paper, recovery is not mere retrieval, but transformative recontextualization, unearthing latent historical forces within exhibition histories. My focus is Nana's House, an installation I curated and produced in 2023, which featured centrally as part of Design for Life, LCF's inaugural exhibition here at East Bank, running from October 23 to January 2024. While Nana's House represents an archival endeavour and an imaginative restaging of history, reclaiming marginalised voices through community co-authorship, it is apt to state up front that this work builds on Michael Macmillan's The Front Room, a recreation of a 1960s West Indian domestic space. However, my reimagining of The Front Room realised for the first time the potential of Walter Benjamin's theory on history as the structural premise of a living room installation. In Nana's House, Benjaminian historical materialism is brought to bear as praxis, transforming the domestic sphere into a space of critical engagement with forgotten histories. In the 1930s, Benjamin wrote that the living room is a box in the theatre of the world. This sentence, found within his master collage, The Arcades Project, has been the impetus for my recent engagement with living room installations. Benjamin's phrase suggests that private, seemingly insular spaces are in fact intimately connected to the public and historical stage. Underlying this is Benjamin's non-linear, fragmentary approach to Marxist historiography, one that treats personal, enclosed spaces as microcosms of larger social, economic, and political dynamics. The domestic sphere doesn't stand apart from history, rather, it reflects the material conditions and ideologies of its time. Objects, furniture, and decorations in a living room reveal much about the historical period, social class, and cultural values of its inhabitants. A 4x4 structure evoking a living room lined with hand-painted 1960s wallpaper, complete with a working television, a record player, a sofa, and family photographs displayed on thrifted furniture with a carefully selected vintage Japan coffee table atop a geometric patterned rug, Nana's house is a living room for East London in that it reflects the heterogeneity of lives and experiences local to our new home here in Stratford. In designing Nana's house, I drew heavily on the technique of collage as a methodological inspiration, echoing Benjamin's concept of the dialectical image. Collage, as Rosalind Krauss argues in The Originality of the Avant-Garde, constitutes a, quote, radically discontinuous reality, one that resists a cohesive narrative and insists upon the simultaneity of disparate elements. This approach is central to Nana's house, where objects and stories retain their individuality whilst forming a composite memory of East London's migrant histories. By employing collage, I disrupt the linearity and the homogenizing tendencies of historical narratives, mirroring the fragmented nature of memory and compelling viewers to actively engage with the installation's layered complexity. The concept of collage extends to Nana herself, a composite character crafted from the narratives of Nigerian migrants in the Lee Valley garment sector. Narratives unearthed through months of dialogue with community members, Nana embodies East London's overlooked fashion history, a history rooted in labour, resilience, and survival. This composite character is a Benjaminian dialectical image, where disparate singular histories intersect to form a non-linear representation that retains each story's unique presence within the whole. In Nana's house, collage operates not only as an aesthetic device, but as a critical method, challenging viewers to recognize the entangled histories obscured by dominant narratives. African women, like those who inspired Nana, were essential to the Lee Valley textile workforce, taking on labor-intensive roles such as sewing, fabric cutting, finishing, and quality control. Factories such as Birketex in Leighton and Fine Spinners and Doublers in Stratford relied on their skill and efficiency to sustain the high levels of garment production demanded by London's fashion market. Though their contributions were vital, their tasks were underpaid and demanding, and African women's labour remains largely unrecognised within British industrial history. By the 1970s, as Britain's textile trade began to decline, factories along the Lee River faced increasing competition from overseas manufacturers. African women, alongside their male counterparts, were among the first to feel the impact of factory closures and layoffs as production shifted abroad. The deindustrialization of the Lee Valley in the 1980s led to widespread job losses, devastating the livelihoods of African women who had supported the industry for decades. Factories like Birketex and smaller garment workshops in Hackney Wick and Stratford either closed down or relocated, fracturing the communities that had formed around these industrial sites. Benjamin's seminal work on the Parisian arcades critiques industrial modernity as complicit in destroying cultural specificity, advancing homogeneity under the guise of progress. Successive waves of displacement due to industrial decline and gentrification, intensified by the 2012 Olympics, have shaped the site upon which we assemble here today. East Bank, built amongst the ghosts of East London's industrial and cultural past, is now sanitized and restructured to fit top-down, institutional, urban agendas. Nana's house occupies a liminal space, a reflection on the layered experiences of those who have made homes in East London's transient, often precarious landscapes. In January 23, as I began my role here as a cultural producer, London College of Fashion was preparing its relocation to East Bank. I was producing and curating both the farewell exhibition, Love Letters to the Buildings, and the opening East Bank exhibition, Design for Life, which explored themes of home and displacement. Contextualized within participatory arts projects with refugees and migrants from Lucy Orta and Helen Story, the living room installation examined the tensions between belonging and displacement within a contested landscape where histories of migration, labor, and resilience once flourished. Nana's House captures what Benjamin describes as a flash, where memory and history intersect, evoking a space both of remembrance and absence. Benjamin's historical materialism views history as an active and explosive process, one capable of awakening latent revolutionary energies through acts of remembrance and recovery. This notion of awakening is manifest in the installation, which confronts the erasure of local communities by recovering fragments that carry the urgency of now time, thereby reframing these memories within contemporary consciousness. Recovery, then, is not a nostalgic return, but a critical engagement with the histories that continue to influence and shape the present. Nana's House illuminates the possibilities of historical materialism as an exhibition premise, teaching us to approach the past as an aesthetic field that demands our active, critical engagement with now time, the now time of contemporary consciousness. Nana's House serves as a Benjaminian vehicle for redemption. It holds the memories of Lee Valley's deindustrialization within its constellatory form. Fragments held together by threads that we, as viewers, are called upon to perceive and interpret. The goal was for the decline and displacement of our recent past to become reawakened in the contemporary moment, echoed in the silent struggles of those who today lay prostrate in the onward procession of progress. As Benjamin states, there is no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism. Thanks.
Hello everyone, I'm Claire. Hopefully you can hear me, but please wave if you can't. I've got quite a faint voice apparently. Anyway, I am going to launch into this talk with one of my favourite images, which I seem to add to most of my talks and seminars and PowerPoints, simply because it just gets me in the mood of contemplation, of reflection, of issues around sort of mystery and, capturing the dream of the curator, the fashion designer, the model, the photographer. However, I'm going to look at, rather than looking into the future, as Lee Miller is here, I'm going to look a bit into the past. So when that pioneer of fashion studies, Elizabeth Wilson, wrote her brilliant 22 memoir, Unfolding the Past, her aim was to trace the relationship between personal experience and her writing, revisiting pivotal moments from childhood, adolescence, and adult life, to explore her belief that research, by its nature, is always a form of autobiography. In it, she unfolded, in the language of the publisher's blurb, the garment of her life, in a wide-ranging exploration of scenes from her past, her difficult relationship with her mother, fashion in the 60s, and gay liberation. In this journey through time, she showed how experiences are inseparable from the way we seek to explain and understand them, offering a unique and deeply personal account of her and our cultural world. As academics, historians, curators, and crystal gazers, we also inhabit both the past and the future, but still tend to distrust the subjective force of memory. Although I've been involved in and had a passionate interest in life writing for years, by which I include autobiography, biography, oral history, and object-led provenance, embracing my own personal history with a curatorial career is not something I've presented before in an academic context. It's easy to become nostalgic for who we once were and to connect unconnected aspects of our lives as if there'd been some grand plan, to look for answers in the crystal ball. As the biographer and founder of the Oxford Centre for Life Writing, Hermione Lee, wrote in Body Parts, Essays on Life Writing, biographies are full of verifiable facts, but they're also full of things that aren't there, absences, gaps, missing evidence, knowledge or information that's been passed from person to person, losing credibility or shifting shape on the way. Biographies, like lives, are made up of contested objects, relics, testimonies, versions, correspondences, the unverifiable. What does biography do with the facts that can't be fixed, the things that go missing, the body parts that have been turned into legends and myths? Hopefully, it's not too much of a stretch to equate Lee's words with curation, and in particular fashion curation, for its bodily characteristics make it unique amongst the visual arts. Over the years, I've often viewed curation as a way to order objects and information, but I'm painfully aware that this is often a fiction. What's also a factor is how easily data is lost, and how important museums and archives are as protectors not only of objects, but the memories around them. It struck me recently how my own history is shredding, how the museum I first knew has changed, at first slowly, then with dizzily increasing speed. Following some research questions for one of last year's MA cohort about radical fashion, my first major exhibition at the V&A, I realised hardly any images existed of it, although it only took place in 2001. I found I was experiencing a kind of mourning for what could not be regained, restaged, or realised, or recalled. Instead, a form of collective memory has to step in. Supported by the brilliance of initiatives like the Centre for Fashion Curation's Exhibiting Fashion online archive that aims to capture the ineffable. The oral historian Linda Sandino has spent decades recording life stories, many of which are now stored in the British Library, and they make hour after hour of fascinating listening. Sandino describes oral history as a research methodology that, in the case of the ongoing V&A project, contributes to the meaning and understanding of the museum through the personal stories of its curators. Rather than seeing oral history as simply a window on the past, she suggests that such narratives function on several levels, as content, as biography, and as thematically orientated testimony. When Ben asked me what I might talk about this afternoon, I began to think about the connection between biography, oral history, and fashion curation, because all seem to share the same experiential, flexible, fallible qualities. I was thinking about how the vitrine or shop window, the looking glass and mirror, the crystal ball, the photographic lens, seem to possess some magic quality that presents a very particular version of truth that enhances desirability of specialness and also enhances strangeness, as in the case of Atget's image here. In 1936, Walter Benjamin described how Atget's Paris project led to images that operated beyond their ostensible purpose, appearing unintentionally but uncannily like the scene of a crime. As we all know, museum fashion displays often have their own share of strangeness, often because of the presence of mannequins. Who is looking at what, I wondered as I looked at this image, before having one of those leaps of memory, a sudden folding of time, which led me to think about my own relationship with the display, appearances, arrangements, glass. I'd known for a long time that my parents' first shop was called Claire Fashions. I thought it was an amusing footnote rather than specifically relevant to my career. This image from our family album dates from 1957, a time when there really were still horses and carts and rag and bone men. The shop was in the Fulham Road near to Parsons Green. We were living in a rented flat above, and I was too young to remember anything other than the enormous spiders in the bath and the geyser that spat out a stream of hot brown water, for we didn't stay there long. You can see that there's a sale. The queue snakes down the road, women, mothers, grandmothers, none particularly privileged, but all concurring with the bell-shaped fashions of the time. They're waiting for the shop to open. There's a pram, a pushchair. A bicycle leans against a lamppost, and at the end of the queue, a small boy stands slightly apart, hands in his short pockets, regarding my father, who took this photograph from the other side of the road. He was proud of my mother's business sense, her work ethic, and her practicality. Before this, she used to work for the Post Office Savings Bank at its HQ in Blythe Road, Olympia. Another coincidence, perhaps, for it became a building I knew very well as the Clothworkers' Centre. Claire Fashions only lasted a few years, but round about the time I came back from university in the 1980s and moved back into the flat above, my family took over the shop again. This time the stock was quite different, but what drew me in was the shop window. At night it was like a brilliant stage set, a glimpse into another world of interesting things: paintings, mirrors, chairs, rugs, velvet curtains, stuffed birds, silvery things, things whose use had long been forgotten, and, very wonderfully, fashion, remnants, old clothes, people's belongings, wardrobes. I began to do the shop windows to learn about the relationship between objects, how one could inform and offset the other. I created dialogues, dynamics, and got cross if something was sold and ruined the display. You can see one of these windows on the right with a view through to the street. Of course, this was a stopgap. By then I was volunteering at the V&A, and in 1979 I became a full-time curator and never looked back. I think my father was rather relieved. This is what I worked on. I won't go into that. However, skipping over a whole career, looking back, vitrines and shop windows, aquariums and terrariums, viewpoints and glimpses have always intrigued me. It's the mystery of glass, solid yet transparent, strong but brittle, and such an important part of the history of display. Think back to the floor-to-ceiling glass cases in the 1900 Paris Expo, the result of technology in cast-iron construction, and the emergence of the department store beckoning the consumer in with its vast window displays. And then mysterious windows like the seasonal fantasias that the sculptor Janine Janet created for Balenciaga, without including any of the real stuff that was for sale. How much windows say about our intentions, our relationship with objects, whether to publicise, sell, educate, protect and entertain. The invention of glass, its transparency, compels us to be truthful to our curatorial purpose, for everything, including our expertise, is on display. To conclude, the museum vitrine cannot release its contents. In fact, the price we pay for containing objects in exhibitions, displays, permanent galleries is that we will not let them go. That suits me. As I said, I never wanted my shop window displays messed with. Today, when it comes to exhibitions, even though open display has become increasingly common, there's still a necessary and uncommon delight in a museum vitrine. I've admired live fashion all my career, and that's why I started Fashion in Motion in 1999, which of course sees clothing stepping out of the case into the corridors of the museum, roaming around freely, having willpower. But I've often wanted fashion to slow down. It's a restless discipline. It's fast-moving. I've wanted it to slow down, even stop for a moment, so that I can have a really good look. I think my conclusion is that that's the purpose of a vitrine, to allow us to have a really good look at what we care about.
Given the highly professional talks we've just heard, where everyone actually spoke to time, or even shorter, yay everyone, thank you very much. What we're going to do is we're going to just rejig the timings a little bit. We'll now have our Q&A with Karen van Gotsenhoven. We'll be here in 1 minute. And then what we'll do is we'll have a 10-minute break, and then we'll go straight into N.J. Stevenson's talk. before we conclude for the day, and then we can go for drinks, which hopefully you will be able to join us at. So just give us one more minute. Karen will be here in one moment, and then we can have a short break, and then NJ Stevenson's talk before the roundup. Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome Karen to this session this afternoon. I think Karen van Gotsenhoven, I'm going to ask her in a minute to talk about some of her past projects, but I just wanted to speak for a moment about, in a way, the importance of this session to us on behalf of the Centre. I mean, we've been talking about the importance of recovering fashion exhibitions. We've been talking about their importance as primary sources, how we may want to document them. Gabriele spoke about a very kind of seismic shift in the relationship to fashion exhibitions in Italy in 1980, where we can actually pinpoint a moment in time when culturally there's a kind of consensus around new needs. And I think the importance for me of this session and my delight in welcoming Karen here today is because it represents a moment like that, which comes along very, very rarely. And that is establishing a new department. We've been talking about the continuities within departments and events, temporary events within museum practices. But Karen has come to London with an incredibly particular task, and that is to create a department, which is the stuff of dreams for us, I think, in this room. It's the stuff of dreams, probably quite literally, but also it's about intentions. And so I think it's very interesting to have this conversation in a way before your first exhibition in London. Karen has taken on the post of fashion curator at the Barbican Art Gallery. It's the first time that a permanent curatorial position has been created that is described as a fashion curatorial position, and therefore an implied department around fashion. It signals an acknowledgement of fashion as an important cultural kind of component within the Barbican Art Gallery and their ongoing programming, or intentions around ongoing programming. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful, and it happens to be you. And what I would love to do is ask you a little bit about what has informed your own practice, and then move on to your vision. And in a way, at this very incredible moment where it can still be hypothetical enough and real enough. And I think that, I love that moment between the imagined and the real, and the intentions, and what we feel when there's a feeling of doing something again or afresh. Mm-hmm. And I think it's incredibly important. You already have a wonderfully strong relationship with the Centre for Fashion Curation, and so I think it's certainly a huge pleasure and privilege to have you here this afternoon to look to the future with us.
Yeah.
So I wondered whether you could tell us a little bit about your own practice and a little bit around your perspective, how you identify in a way as a fashion curator, what you would consider your own perspective.
Thanks a lot, Judith. First of all, before we dive in, I would like to thank you personally for your support and guidance over the years. I realized to actually coming here today, it was 15 years ago that I started in Antwerp, and so it's the same amount of years as the center here.
Yes.
So it's a sort of similar timeline in a different way. But also the sort of kinship that I feel with everyone here, I think is very important to to stress how happy I am because we're in a small field, but still that we're also connected, and no curator is an island.
No.
And so it's very nice in a way at the Barbican now. Yesterday we were still talking about would there still be some mannequins from the vulgar left over? So it's nice to be always connected in different ways, and then to be here today. So, sorry about your question about my own perspective. So I've worked in different museums, mostly collection-based museums. So that is already a big difference with the Barbican, which is a more multidisciplinary arts center without a fashion collection. So in that sense, there will be a fashion program, but not a fully fledged fashion department with collection curators and other stuff. But from my own sort of background and practice, I come from a long time ago from literature and library science, actually. Studied gender studies. So for me, fashion is really in the sphere of maybe also cultural studies. And I have always tried to, I would say, maybe take a sort of narrative approach to fashion curation. I also think, as you can see from the images, and I just want to stress that mostly I've worked in tandem with other curators, and I just see fashion as a very collaborative. Not just fashion curation, but the whole endeavor as a very collaborative practice. And so so at the different institutions I worked at, so it's the MoMU in Antwerp and the Costume Institute at the Met, but also other places like the Hasselt Fashion Museum. I think my own identity, I think, is still very much tied to literature and cultural studies, but especially now I think the sort of interdisciplinary aspect of a sort of collision of different disciplines, I think, is what makes, is the greatest thing I think about fashion, that it has so many facets and touch points with different audiences and communities. Something I think is also very important going forward at the Barbican, how we can bridge different audiences and communities, because fashion, both in a material sense and a more cultural sense, touches on so many people's lives. And also within the arts, I think obviously you have the material textiles aspect of it, but also the performative. And in that sense, it's nice also to be at the Barbican because it is embedded in, I would say, quite a live institution where a lot of the arts that are shown are also embodied and alive. And in that sense, I think fashion really has a place at the Barbican as a sort of living.
Absolutely. I think that if you go back to your own trajectory and you look at Modemuseum, but you also look at MoMU and you look at the Met, they both come with huge collections, don't they? And a kind of responsibility to those collections.
Yes.
Which obviously the Barbican doesn't have. It's a gallery. It's a huge institution. But it doesn't come with a responsibility to a collection. What do you feel about that? Do you feel that is sort of liberating, or do you feel? Can you talk a bit about your relationship to both MoMU and the Met in relation to their collections and in terms of their priorities? Just if we go back one step.
Yes.
And the kind of their mission statements.
Yes.
And for a moment compare the two mission statements and then hypothesize with us about what that then brings in terms of an imperative going forward for you.
Yes, I think both of them, I mean, obviously they're very different.
Sure.
But what they have in common is in a way that exhibitions activate or create, I mean, as I said, the narratives around the collection and the objects that are in-house. And I think that both of them, as we've seen in many institutions, are also going towards more permanent. MOMU has opened a permanent display of the collection, whereas when when I worked there, it was only temporary exhibitions, and also the Met has announced, they're going to take over what's now the retail store as it's the best real estate of the museum. So after the long decades in the basement, they get the like prime, because it also is a big draw for visitors, and so the permanent display will be quite visible from the entrance. So those are just two examples, and I think a lot of museums want to have also the V&A will reopen their permanent gallery next spring. We see a renewed, I would say, interest in maybe in permanent displays versus, I guess it also has to do with I think the whole object biography. I think people are looking more at objects at the moment. On the other hand, as you said, it's also a relief maybe, or there is, I think, room for to create a different type of fashion exhibition or experience from the ones we know and we've seen. And in that sense, the Barbican, or the lack of collection opens possibilities to work more on commissions or more installations that are not so tied to a collection approach or an acquisition approach, or certain most collections have specific focuses, so I feel like we can be freer in the range of objects that we can show.
Yeah, and what would you typify MOMU's mission statement and the Met's? Where do you feel you're kind of in a way where you learnt your skills? It was, MOMU, there's obviously a very strong lace collection, an incredible collecting policy and relationship to contemporary dress as well, isn't there? So
yes.
There are these two incredible strengths, certainly from the outside, so to speak.
Yes.
And did you feel the kind of pressures to kind of highlight those strengths, for example?
The sort of Belgian fashion narrative is, of course, it's sort of raison d'être, so it's normal that it's part of the collection and the focus. I think it's very, like with the lace collection, it's very rich, and there are many. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. Also because of its connection with the school and the dynamism of it. The Met, on the other hand, is a completely encyclopedic, so it was much more. It was, bigger or broader, but also had a lot of new accents. So we acquired indigenous designers in the last years I was there. So they were also starting to diversify the sort of Western canon approach. So I think that's exciting that I know it also happens at the V&A, that the encyclopedic museums, that there is still room for a lot of room
of course,
new
because
approach.
there's a kind of residue 19th century project, isn't there? And I think that those are changes. I think we all acknowledge a kind of seismic change, of course, going on at the moment, but it needs to be slow. If you've got 70,000 objects in your storage, then it's a slow process to really change the focus, or what would be perceived as the focus. We acknowledged earlier Amy's exhibition at the V&A that kind of through a temporary exhibition cut across what the association with couture, for example, at the V&A and what was considered design that led. That was this phrase that was, used all the time in relation to their collection, which basically meant privileged dress, couture dress, etc. That was put into question, yes, and sort of problematized, as we often do, and I think that's part of our shared in this room excitement around temporary exhibitions, because they can momentarily step outside what the permanent collection is saying. You're saying this is what the permanent collection is saying. However, there's a kind of essay form that we can harness to cut in and say, well, these are the current debates. What do you feel are the kind of urgent debates, I guess, or urgent kind of questions that you feel might be possible at the Barbican that have perhaps not been possible before, or that you feel that you haven't been able to realize before? Not in great detail, I don't want to give away or kind of prematurely announce something that you're doing, but what were the urgencies that you brought to the conversation when you had those early conversations at the Barbican? What do you feel that was the kind of the crux of the conversation?
The urgency, I think we're all living, our current, situation in the world is quite rather an urgent one in many different ways, and I think, I don't know how other people in the room feel about it. Sometimes, fashion exhibition making can seem quite trivial, considering what's going on. But I do think that fashion exhibition making is a way, or a sense, is a type of world making, and it's making the world anew, or speculating on what could be also for the industry and for the world at large. Is maybe a very grand ambition, but for myself, I try to see it that way, that even though we are, we're dress and fashion historians and practitioners, that there is really a bigger, I don't know how to say differently, a sense of world making that happens with the audience and with the industry as well, and that's what I think that where the Barbican, or where we can be freer in that sort of more speculative approach, rather than maybe creating narratives around things that exist. Maybe think more in a way about the future.
Yeah, I think when I think of the Barbican, I think of experimental exhibitions to do with fashion, and I remember seeing Jam many years ago. The 30 years of Japanese design was an extraordinary exhibition there. The memorable Victor and Rolf exhibition there, where the giant doll's house was built by Siber Tetero, and seeing these mannequins at a third, I think, scale. I should know, because as you know, I'm rather interested in scale. But just thinking, yes, there are so many different ways of saying this, and I felt that there was certainly, when I worked very briefly on the Vulgar exhibition, that there was a kind of weight of a kind of experimentation, that there was a daring that came with that brief. Do you feel that there's a desire to continue something which has already started, or whether the intentions are new and different, if you see what I mean?
Oh, I think you're certainly right about, the sort of idea of pushing artistic boundaries or taking risks is still there. I mean, we've been working for a while now on the sort of going forward on the vision. There is a strong will or a sense of creating interdisciplinary exhibitions, so between fashion, design, architecture, different arts. And then, as I said, also future facing and harnessing the energy of the, for example, here or the CSM student. I mean, the energy that is already here in a way in London, and being part of a bigger, I would say, ecology of creativity. That is also really something we talked about early on. It's not just the exhibitions or not just, but to try and gather the. I mean, there is already so much, but to create also another platform for things to sprout.
And so do you feel that the programming around fashion will in fact extend out at the Barbican to affect the other departments? Because you're right, it's an incredible kind of composite organizations with theatre.
So there is already, I mean, we saw that Marketa is already doing her fashion film, I mean, partly next spring, I think, in the Barbican. There is but I think that's the thing we can do more of is bringing together, film, performance, music, fashion in different strands.
And what do you feel, I mean, we're looking at your incredible images of exhibitions that you've curated in the past. What do you feel that you're going to bring from your own practice? What do you feel your own mark might be?
I think...
Or your own priorities?
I mean, apart from the more, as I said, the more like cultural studies or theoretical or perspective, I think from the beginning what was, as you know, also for you and also in Antwerp, very strong was exhibition design or creating, again, the sort of world-making. I remember the first year being a bit overwhelmed or thinking, wow, in other museums they can, or in a painting exhibition, it's just about, changing the paintings. But here, as you know, at MoMA there was always a completely new slate. Every show was a completely new, and I think now museums are also going towards more modular approaches, where also because of sustainability concerns and also just the sheer amount of work it takes. But still, I think that I've worked with so many talented exhibition designers over the last 15 years, and I think it's exciting to see where new developments are going and sort of bringing together the as you know, the sort of artistic people with the people who create the set design, the designers. I mean, that for me gives me the most satisfaction, is to, like you say, it's like it's not an assemblage, but a sort of a composite of different voices and especially sort of the creative ones, bringing them together.
And do you think that therefore we need an extended definition for fashion? Do you feel that it's very loaded, isn't it? And as I said earlier, it comes with its prejudices, along the way. What do you feel about that? What do you
mean the definition of fashion exhibition?
Yeah, in a way, a kind of how we need to kind of extend the definition of it. Is the description of your role curator of fashion? And
yes.
So what do you take that to mean?
I do think that also, I have to say, after COVID, I felt that there was maybe some space for, in general, for everything and for the industry and fashion exhibitions to be maybe rethought. And these big shocks like COVID sometimes take some time to, as we see in the world, take some time to be processed. But I feel like there is still room for new approaches. And I'm not saying that I know what it is, but I'm in a way just grateful that there is the space to experiment with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, isn't it, of having a kind of open opportunity. And it seems, and I wanted to ask you about this, because it's obviously, you're given a role like that. It's not only subject but method, isn't it, that is an opportunity. It's the opportunity to work differently, collaboratively, differently, and kind of in terms of how the working methods are actually instituted. Are you going to be given the chance to propose different working methods, so to speak?
Yes, and also work with different people. Different methods, different people, different approaches. So we really work on the sort of multidisciplinary angle, and we're talking to different parties, and also as I said, the sort of commissioning aspect. So working directly with new, things you don't know. What they will look like. So that's really the sort of trust I get from Shanae, who's the head of the arts gallery, and a colleague from the Met Museum. So we were colleagues there. He was a curator of contemporary art, and we had a lot of dream projects. But with the Met is an encyclopedic museum, so it's also the building is very siloed, so it's not so easy to do a lot of. They're doing it, but it's still mainly it has 18 curatorial departments, so it's very nice to be in a place where you don't have these restrictions and you can dream about different encounters.
And I think it's amazing being in an institution where the risk is considered worth it, so to speak. Where the risk is part of the rhetoric around it, or experimentation, and these words that are very useful. Because they kind of sponsor the intention and the act, and then it's not really about the aesthetic precision of the outcome. It's about the conversation, which we've heard quite a bit about today. I think that if we'd had this session, even 5 years ago, the interventions would have been very different. So it's already shows us a completely different attitude to authorship, not only content but authorship and kind of method. But what would be your sort of non-negotiable? It's a hard question, I know, and you can just say no, I can't answer that. But if you were to kind of go in and think this is in terms of your own vision, what or the other way, what might be your priorities coming into a role?
That's very. You mean the non-negotiables of having to?
Just in terms of how you want to work or what you want it to do differently. I might be greatly romanticizing this, but I think it's worth it, because I think it's worth thinking about, and I'm sure you've thought about it most of all. I just wonder, whether you feel.
For me, the freedom from the institution is very big, but as you know, it's more. Working with the fashion industry has become, over the last, I would say, 5 years, increasingly more almost impossible because of the rapid changes at the design houses and how that affects the archives and the policies around the archives, the loans, all these things. I find that that's for me the biggest hurdle, rather than maybe programming assignments or I see that's becoming really, because we don't have a collection, so you have to you're always very dependent on the fashion houses, and since I think the success of fashion exhibitions and the blockbusters actually has made this more difficult. Because everything is so professionalized, and compared to 10 years ago where it was still in the basement.
And do you think that that you're going to need to tread, obviously, a very careful path between the kind of golden ticket that fashion exhibitions often kind of represent, are represented as in terms of box office successes versus a kind of versus the kind of experimentation that might be kind of sponsored within that?
Yes, that's indeed difficult. I mean, for everyone in our field, I think you have the sort of commercial or box office expectations. Also, you're dealing with people in the industry that you usually have a relationship with, so you can be critical to a certain extent. And what I'm lucky about is that I feel that also working with people from in the other departments at the Barbican is that because of their sort of approach to being innovative or daring in the other arts, there is not so much, like you said, a sort of tradition, or there is not yet a certain mold it has, to, or like there is still a lot of openness towards non-conforming topics or approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that the centre's, the exhibiting fashion project that we've been referring to today, is establishing what a tradition looks like, or what a discipline looks like. I think the intention was to kind of be able to present a snapshot of something that that is evolving. Jeff Horsley's essay in our exhibiting fashion book came out of a conversation where we were commenting on 1971 being a kind of slightly gratuitous starting point, but nevertheless something that had the bones of what we felt was so generally recognized as a kind of fashion exhibition that was almost cliched, in the sense that it had the schlappy mannequins, it had the this, it had the that in a way, as a kind of mythology of fashion exhibitions, it's kind of, that's what it looks like. And Amy and I had many conversations about, well, kind of that looked like that. It was an early example of that thing. And then we looked at just, we were kind of researching exhibitions, and it really felt that the graph, went like this, that suddenly there was a kind of exponential number. And we were also speculating, slightly unrealistically possibly, about sort of catching them, capturing this kind of repository of them, such that we could collectively look at this and say, what does this discipline look like? Do you feel that you look at that, I'm not saying our website, but just at that as a tradition, as something that is part of your brief? Or do you feel that in a way, yes, they are very specific tools, but in a way what we're what we're now encountering is something quite other. We had to work very fast and hard to justify something. Do you feel that you look to other curatorial practices actually more than those within what we might describe as
Our
fashion
field.
exhibition making? Do you look at different artistic practices in your own work?
Yes, but I think I do both. I mean, as I said, I worked with a lot of fashion curators in our field, and I think that's really expanding. I would say since Savage Beauty and all these big, I think there was the whole fashion as art wave, and a lot of people from the wider arts world coming in, and I feel that now it's an exciting time, more, as I said, with voices from non-Western communities, makers, and other. I just feel like there's been different, and luckily, as you said, it's always in becoming, and I would say I'm both inspired by let's say, broader artistic disciplines, but as well as with the voices in our own field, and I enjoy working with them and learning both on the side of more maybe senior people, and then also the new voices. I think it's we all know that fashion hasn't always had the highest status but I do think it's a liberatory thing, and that a lot of the evolutions that other curators now have to deal with, we are already beyond. Like we have already the term, the being participatory, the growing importance of communicating with your audiences and the sort of participatory approach. I feel like that fashion has already been always maybe more accessible. And that's sort of the senior or authorial curators from other disciplines still have to make that jump.
Yeah. And do you feel that you can be more politicized?
You mean now at the Barbican? Yes, because it's like I said, it's in the DNA. It's also started from a sort of utopian vision of inclusivity and community building, the whole site. I mean, more than just the arts center, but there is a more like the wider brief is purposeful programming. So there is a strong ethical value that is part of it, of the heritage or the history of the.
Yeah. And in terms of your own priorities, and then I think we have. Well, we've got 10 minutes, but I just wanted to ask you one last question. I'm sure there are going to be questions from the floor, but just in terms of your priorities in relation to the programming, is there something that you feel were the priorities that you brought to the table? In terms of how the project might be an expanded site, an expanded practice. In what direction would you put your energies, so to speak, behind? Is there something that you came with a sense of wanting to do it differently compared to perhaps your practice in the past?
Yeah, so it's I mean, the more speculative rather maybe than looking back, or I mean, the more future-facing aspect, being more community-driven or community-based, and then also, more interdisciplinary.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate you can't tell us what the project you're working on at this moment, so don't ask that question. If people have any questions, I did want to open it up to the floor for just a couple more minutes. I'm going to stay to... We do have a question.
We're recording this for our online guests, so if you wouldn't mind waiting for the mic, that would be appreciated.
Yes, we have people watching.
Thank you very much for a fascinating conversation and for this afternoon. I did have a question for Karen, which is, you mentioned that the kind of utopian mission of the Barbican is something to kind of grapple with, but I'm wondering about the building and also the interior space of the exhibition hall, if either of those things prompt thoughts about a response in terms of your projects.
Sorry, the last part?
Either the building or the interior space of the exhibition hall.
Mm-hmm.
If those two elements prompt thoughts about what you might program.
Yes, thank you so much, Sonnet. It's indeed, maybe I didn't make the connection enough, but I think that my practice so far has focused a lot on exhibition design or creating worlds, and I feel like the Barbican exhibition space is a world in a world, or how do you say that? I know there is an expression for it, like mise en abîme.
Yeah, mise en abîme is fine.
Yeah. And so it's true, like yesterday we went to look at some storage rooms, and we went through a lot of there's a lot of intermediate spaces in the building, and a lot of special. It's really a sort of ecology, and that is still, it was built with these ideas of sort of community, and I think that the space itself is very, It really invites, I think, the exhibition space invites sort of experiments and new approaches, and I think that, that it's it's like a double mission, or a double, like you have the whole Barbican, and so there is all the touch points that are possible, or the surfacing with the other things happening in the building, and then within the gallery, I think we're actually now for the first exhibition also looking at new routing and new ways to experience the space. So I feel excited about sort of activating a space that has a lot of possibilities, and hopefully it works out.
It is so imposing, as Sonnet said. It's really an imposing space. Will you be using the main space or also the curve, or is it all?
It's mostly will be, so it's going to be shows about every 18 months in the main. That's the idea going forward. So a fashion exhibition every 18 months.
That's amazing. That's a lot.
A lot of work.
You're busy.
Another question?
Amy?
Amy.
When I worked at the V&A in the 1990s, I felt I was so supported. I was supported to take risks, to do brave things. And one of the people that Gabriele showed was Valerie Mendes, who sort of mentored both Claire and I. And from the minute I got the job there, I just felt I was empowered and I could take risks. And if they went wrong, she would support me, because she knew the principle, the integrity was there. And I think now there's a lot of fear in the cultural sector. And do you feel that you have that kind of support that I felt I had in the 1990s?
Yes, and it's quite new for me, but it's an extraordinary thing.
It makes all the difference.
I'm really pleased.
Thank you so much, Amy.
It's the thing, isn't it?
One more question over here.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, because you were speaking so much about that kind of interdisciplinary approach to your curational kind of goals, with the issues and some would consider controversies that the curational department at the Barbican has been seeing in the past few years. How is that influencing the ways of which you're bringing in external voices to your curatorial practice?
I mean, the institution as a whole has gone through a lot of changes and a lot of controversies in the last couple of years. There's also been a change in leadership, and I feel that for our program, we are really free, and we're starting anew. So in that sense, I don't feel burdened by them, and I also feel. Hopefully, as we just talked about, there is a lot of fear at the moment in general, but I do feel that there is also real will to address it and to be maybe hopefully leading in a way or there is also will for people to be in a more open environment, and we are certainly trying to go there, and also to have no restrictions, even in your mind, no mental.
Well, I'm going to call it time because. Is there another question?
There is
no.
No, I just said we're on time.
Yes, well, I wanted to call it time because I know you have a train to catch, but I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you,
Judith. And we will invite you back when you are able to talk about your new project. But I just thought it would be such a lovely thing this afternoon in this kind of reflective space to welcome you and to welcome you to the centre, welcome you to London. As you are here more consistently, and hope to share some of those conversations with you.
I look forward to it.
Moving forward. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Judith.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Carol. Let's have a 10-minute break. So at 5:10, if you wouldn't mind coming back to this space, and then we'll have NJ Stevenson's talk, and then a roundup, and then drinkies. Thank you. 5:10, back here. Hello, Hello, everyone. I'm going to... You want to hear my dulcet tones on a Friday evening, don't you? Can I ask that everyone sits down, please? Let's get going with our last but not least session. We are very happy to have NJ Stevenson, who is going to be presenting an overview and insights into the exhibition she's recently co-curated. I'm not going to say any more. It's over to you, NJ. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Ben. I can hear that works. Yes, hello. My name's NJ Stevenson. I teach here in the Cultural and Historical Studies Department, and also on the MA Fashion Curation and the MA Fashion Cultures and Histories. It's nice to feel at home in this building because it's better not do that. It's quite daunting following all these speakers who've had presented some amazing papers today. Thank you so much for asking me to speak today. I am the co-curator of an exhibition which is currently on at the Fashion and Textile Museum, Outlaws, Fashion Renegades of 80s London. And this is going to be very informal. I haven't got a script. I haven't timed anything, so just tell me when half an hour is up. And so we're just going to whiz through and see what happens. So yes, I'm co-curating the exhibition with my co-curators who are the Art Curation Collective, Martin Green and James Lawler, and David Cabaret, who is the artistic director. And this exhibition happened out of a conversation between Martin and I. Martin and I have been friends since the early 1990s. We met on the club scene. We both saw this quite wonderful small exhibition, Tell Them I've Gone to Papua New Guinea, on Lee Barry at the Fitzrovia Chapel a couple of years ago. And I'm sure some of you saw it. It was a really beautifully evocative installation of some of Lee's later performance pieces in the chapel that was originally part of the Middlesex Hospital where Lee died, which had the first AIDS unit in the UK. And so we saw the exhibition and we both started talking about it, how much we loved it. It was actually at a dinner party and everybody around the table was saying how much they loved it and how wonderful it was and how fantastic of Nicola to allow these costumes to be exhibited. And Nicola is the custodian of Lee's archive and was one of his very good friends and then became his wife before he died. And as I say, I met Martin on the club scene in the early 1990s. I used to see Lee around, but when I came to London, Lee was already doing the fully covered look. I'd never seen his face. In fact, this look on the left that he did, he was wearing at the Skin 2 rubber ball, and he knocked me over on the dance floor, so it's very memorable. Martin and I were both sort of looking at it from our various perspectives, and as a fashion curator, I wanted more of the stories behind the entire community and what was happening in that alternative club and fashion scene at the time. And Martin kind of very much wanted to foreground other voices and other fashion designers who had maybe not been remembered. There was an entire community of people who were both clubbers and worked in the alternative fashion industry in London at the time. And when I say alternative, in the 1980s in London, mainstream fashion was actually really very staid. There were designers like Jean Muir and Ruth Oldfield. People were looking maybe at designing, hopefully, for Princess Diana. There were a lot of ball dresses on the scene. This is something that was completely different. Club fashion was something which at the time was seen as kind of underground and something other. And we really wanted to kind of capture that excitement. And so this is an exhibition that I feel really did build on Amy's seminal work at the V&A with street style, and also the later exhibition at the V&A, Club de Catwalk. So this is Dave Swindell's image of Lee at Taboo with Nicola, who became his wife, and Trojan, one of his best friends and his flatmate. And our other co-curator is David Cabaret. David I've known since I came to London in the late 1980s to come to university. And David was kind of very much another figure on the club scene. These are some of David's various looks at Busby's, at Roma, which was a small club on Oxford Street, and at Kinky Galinky, which is when I knew him, where David started reproducing famous kitsch paintings. This is his version of Tretykov's The Blue Lady. And as part of my curatorial approach, I interviewed a lot of the participants, particularly the lenders and people who had been designers and creatives on the scene at the time. And David particularly remembered seeing Lee walking up Charing Cross Road with a kind of army of acolytes around him, barreling up the road, knocking over people who kind of dared to get in their path, and recorded this in a notebook as a kind of very wide-eyed 17-year-old at the time. So this is David's memory of Lee, and David's memories have become really integral to the process and the kind of the design and the kind of view of the exhibition. But the story really starts in the very early 1980s in London, possibly with the efforts of the Blitz Club, which was started by Steve Strange and Rusty Egan, and had a kind of core member of people who really dressed up. And it was that beginning of people really, really dressing up and setting themselves apart from everybody else who wanted to go out clubbing. And David Holer, who went on to be half of the design label Body Map, is here on the right. And David became one of the participants of the exhibition as well. And this is a photograph of Lee and Trojan in their flat in East London. Part of the narrative of the exhibition is really about the urban pull. It's about that excitement of wanting to get somewhere where you know you're meant to be. I'm sure lots of people recognise that feeling of growing up somewhere quite distant from any kind of urban centre and feeling that you weren't born into this life, you were meant for something else. You need excitement and you need somebody to notice you, and you need to go somewhere where you can be that person that you want to be. And that's what Lee really felt when he was reading the music papers and the NME and all the kind of style magazines that were produced in Britain that he grew up reading in Australia, and he read everything that he possibly could, and he was desperate to come to London. He knew about punk, and he started to see reports of the new romantics around the Blitz Club, and he was absolutely desperate to get here. And he finally did in 1981. And it took him a while, it took him about 18 months, but then he started to find his people. He went to Andrew Logan's Alternative Miss World after seeing an advert in Time Out and dressed up, and he started to meet people. And then he went to Cha-Cha's, which was another club behind Heaven, and met Scarlett Cannon and started to be introduced to people, and little by little started to notice and think about what he was dressing and how he wanted to reinvent himself and how he wanted to be better than anybody else at it. And sort of became very much the centre of a scene that was happening. And there was a kind of cultural value in not only producing fashion to be worn in the daytime and going out at night and wearing that fashion, but also running your own club. And that was what Lee desperately wanted to do. And actually, it was easy to live in London at the time. If you wanted to go there as a student, you had an immediate reason to go there. You could get a grant, you could get your fees paid, you could get your maintenance money, you could sign on, you could join up with a group of friends and you could squat. You could even ring the council and say that you were, for some reason, in peril and you needed to be rehoused immediately, which is what Trojan did when he set fire to their bedsit, committed arson, and then demanded that they were rehoused in Stepney. And this is them in their flat with their Star Trek wallpaper, which we've reproduced in the exhibition. And Lee started to meet people. This is Rachel Orban, another one of his very good friends. Lee met Rachel in Kensington Market when she was sitting on her stool. She had been to Harrow School of Art and had graduated in fashion and was selling her clothes in Kensington Market, and which is a big part of the story of the exhibition, that lots of young designers who felt like they wanted to set themselves apart from this mainstream fashion industry, which was seen as, you know, not something they actually wanted to be part of in London, could very easily go to Kensington Market or even to Camden Market or Great Gear Market in Chelsea and for very little money set up a stall, make some clothes at home with a sewing machine, so not have to venture into that kind of scary world of production that they hadn't particularly been taught about at fashion school. And perhaps maybe get a few friends to help them out and start selling those clothes fairly cheaply on a stall. And so in the exhibition, we've reproduced or kind of recreated some of those Kensington Market stalls. And actually, it's a really great way that we found of displaying the clothes so that you can see a bit more of the construction and the design and how they were put together, as well as evoking the kind of dark scariness of this world that was created by young people for young people and wasn't supposed to be for the grown-ups. And if anybody can remember Kensington Market, it was very dark, it was quite scary, and also quite smelly. But how did this fashion then become disseminated into the mainstream? One of the things that happened was Suzanne Barsh was somebody who had been part of that alternative fashion club scene in London. She had an antique stall in Chelsea Antiques Market and had known Michael and Galinda Kostiff, who were later to run a club called Kinky Galinky. She moved to New York and she found the club scene and the fashion scene there sort of a little bit wanting from what she had experienced in London. And she really found it quite difficult to find exciting clothes. So she came back to London and she asked Galinda to take her around the markets, introduce her to some of the young designers who were selling at the time, find some interesting things for her to see and go to all the clubs, see what was going on. And she bought loads of stuff and she took it back to New York and she opened a small shop which Michael Kostiff designed, and she started selling there. This immediately took off. Suzanne Barsh is extremely good at creating a sensation with whatever she does. And what happened was, slightly to her detriment, the big stores kind of swooped down on these very small London designers and started giving them orders. And she thought, oh, how am I going to compete with this? So she decided to get these young designers and bring them over to New York and stage a big fashion show, which she'd never done before, had no idea how to do it. So she did one in the Roxy roller rink, and some of the models were on roller skates from Starlight Express. And she did one at the Limelight, which was a massive club in New York, which is this one. And then she went to Tokyo and she took some of the designers to Tokyo. This is Trojan in the bathroom in Tokyo, dressed for modelling in Lee's show. And this is Rachel on the catwalk in Tokyo, modelling some of Lee's designs. I interviewed Suzanne because Valerie Steele had done Suzanne Barsh exhibition at FIT, and she very kindly put me in touch with Suzanne. And Suzanne was telling me all about it, and she said, oh, it was such a sensation. They caused such a scandal because they were walking down the catwalk with the Japanese Prime Minister there and bending over and showing their asses. It was amazing. She still loves it. We were, at this point, we were putting together the exhibition collection. Now, the Fashion and Textile Museum has a very, very tiny permanent collection, hardly anything at all. I think we could take one piece from it, which was a Martin Degville ensemble. And we knew already that the exhibition collection, as we wanted to present it, wasn't just going to come from one collector, and it wasn't going to come from one institution. And as I said, I was kind of bringing my curatorial practice to the project by interviewing a lot of people. Martin was very used to searching out people who had become forgotten or who had moved on to other things. He is also a DJ. And what he did was kind of bring his crate digger skills to the fore. And he is like a terrier with a rat. He will not let it go when he's on the search for something. I had really, really wanted some pieces from this collection, Lee's Mincing Queens collection. And we already knew that loads of it had been sold when some of the people involved in that scene had become hard up and they needed to make some money. This is actually from Kerry Taylor's website, and these pieces belong to Marc Vautier, who was the young doorman at Taboo, and they were sold after his death. We knew how many designers had gone to New York and to Tokyo, partly because Michael Kostiff had records of it, because he'd been there, partly because it was listed in Sonnet Stanfield's book, Club to Catwalk. And so we were on the hunt to try and find things that possibly hadn't been shown before in a museum context. And we were quite curious about this designer, Elmaz Hussain, who we kept seeing her name, and we had seen some editorial, but we hadn't seen any clothing at all. And Martin got in touch finally with her son through Instagram, and her son said, well, you know, unfortunately Elmaz died a few years ago and I don't really have anything. I wonder if we could find something that would be great to include her. Maybe my sister knows. And so Martin got in touch with Elmaz's sister, and she said, I don't have anything, but there might be something in my parents' attic. I'll go around and see them and I'll go and have a look. And then Elmaz's sister discovered the entire collection of that had gone to both New York and to Tokyo that Elmaz had made. And there are lots of pieces in the exhibition that haven't been exhibited before, but these pieces hadn't even been seen after they had been taken to Tokyo. So for us, that was a really, really exciting kind of golden moment in the journey and in the adventure of putting this exhibition together. And so this kind of spider's web of contacts grew and grew and grew, and people came forward. People were really, there was a lot of generosity around the project. People really wanted these voices to be heard and to kind of remember their friends. A lot of the people weren't here anymore. It was 1985, so we're kind of very much focusing on 1985, which was the year that Taboo opened, and it closed in 1986. So although some of the aspects of the exhibition kind of go out in various directions, 1985 is very much the focal point. And this is a picture that was given to us by Joan Bury. This is her, of a party in her kitchen, and Lee was one of the guests, and as you can see, he kind of turned up in full Lee. And we particularly liked this. And it kind of, I think it sort of really showed the kind of community of all these people who were really good friends and actually supportive of each other as much as they were horrible as well, quite often. And very competitive and crazy. It was a real moment of people coming and making their own family in London. This is a picture of, this is actually a still from Lana Pillai's video, which was shot in Maximus and at Taboo. And I think it kind of shows the variety of different people and different looks that were there. I mean, we really wanted to show that in the exhibition, that it wasn't just about one particular aesthetic or one particular vision. It was about the kind of craziness of this kind of creative microcosm of people coming together, where they would kind of swap notes in the evening and see what everybody was looking and check them out, think, I need to up my game, I'm going to do something more fabulous next week. And sort of go down and find out who was working on what shoot, who worked for which magazine, if there was a photographer around. It was kind of very much a cultural exchange and a social media before social media. Karen Franklin told me that when she was working on ID before she worked on the clothes show, she would work late in the ID offices and then go down to Taboo because a lot of people who lived in squats didn't have phones, and she knew that was a way to get hold of them because she knew that they would be there, and if they weren't there, they would be somewhere else the next night because there was a club night every night. But we really wanted to give the impression of this really youthful energy that sparked a moment. So this is a picture of the dance floor in the exhibition. What we wanted to do was kind of really suggest this idea of variety and of constructing personal and individual identities. So you can see it looks really, really different, and it looks quite mad. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the mannequins. Dennis Northruft, head of exhibitions at the Fashion and Textile Museum, and I both obviously were aware of the discourse around mannequins. Martin, as an art curator, was not aware, and neither was David. Dennis and I sort of looked at each other, and we were like, but we really, really wanted to do this. And there are various reasons why we felt that this was a good decision, or a decision that we will stand by. This is very much ongoing. This exhibition only opened just over a month ago, so there hasn't been much time for critical reflection. So I'm still thinking about what I think about this. But I had always been really interested in Ardell Rootstein mannequins as part of the story of the British fashion industry. And in Judith and Amy's book, Exhibiting Fashion Before and After 1971, Amy has written about Ardell Rootstein mannequins and the use of them in Cecil Beaton's exhibition. And this is an installation that was at John Prince's Street, using the Ardell Rootstein archive, which was donated to LCF. Am I right? You did this, Amy?
The archive's been taken away again, which is a real shame. But what was terrible was that Cecil painted.
That was what I was about to say. So yes, So what really fascinated me was that this is the original Daniela Luna mannequin from cast from a 1960s very famous model, and this was the mannequin used in Cecil Beaton's exhibition, which was, as Amy said, sprayed white. And I was just really, really fascinated by the fact that these mannequins had created so much conversation, and it's still ongoing. This is the Twiggy mannequin. This was used, by the way, for the contemporary fashion installation in the 1971 exhibition. So the Twiggy mannequin was actually made in the 60s, but was given a Renaissance wig to go with the Bill Gibb dress to kind of give the impression of what Twiggy looked like in 1971. So that was one of my reasons why I was drawn to the idea of using Rootstein mannequins. The Rootstein mannequins are part of a collection which is owned by David. Amy was talking earlier about the collector's gene, and lots of people collect clothes. I collect clothes, objects. David collects mannequins, and he's really fascinated by them. So Martin had an idea that he wanted to do a sort of art installation from David's mannequins, like the Roxy Music album cover manifesto, which gives the idea of this crazy, crazy party. And it seemed to make sense because if you look at the larger picture, the mannequins are full of movement, and this was about a club scene. This was about a club dance floor where the clothes were made to be moved in, and we wanted to really show the attitude and the energy behind that. And what do you do when the story of this of this group of people who construct their identity through fashion, through clothing they make, but also through hair and makeup? It was really integral to their identity. What do you do about that? You have to some way include that. And if your art director and the person who was part of that community also happens to collect mannequins and also happens to know how to do this incredible makeup, then it seemed to be like kind of obvious that that's what would happen. Anyway, that's what did happen. And David had the wigs made by a company, La Peluca, and he did the makeup himself. And I do have to say that if it had been anybody else, I would have been much more worried about it, but I had ultimate confidence that, because I knew that David did everything with such meticulous, perfect detail, that it would be okay. And this is the mannequin that David did of one of his own looks. And as I said, the curatorial process sort of started to shape up organically as we kind of played to our different strengths. And so I was interviewing people, and one of the people that I interviewed was Ian Webb, who I had met when I curated the Bill Gibb exhibition at the Fashion and Textile Museum in 2008. He was really helpful because he was writing a book about Bill Gibb at the time. Ian was one of the original Blitz kids, and he was kind of very much on the fashion scene, and he was also the fashion editor of Blitz magazine, which started in 1980, as did The Face and ID. So this idea of style, the word style, was kind of very much part of that immediate cultural lexicon of the 1980s time. And this is a shoot that Ian did using designs from Annie Lapaz. Martin contacted Annie Lapaz. So while I was interviewing people and going through the magazine archives at LCF and at CSM, Martin was busy making use of all his contacts and getting hold of people for me to interview. I've got 4 minutes left, okay. And finding the clothes. And so these are some of Annie's designs. She dressed Kim Wilde. She also co-ran a nightclub called Circus, which was really important. It was where Lee kind of started dressing up and met lots of people. And it's also where Lee met Michael Clark. And Michael Clark, again, was part of the way that Lee's designs were disseminated into the mainstream. Sort of, well, not entirely the mainstream, but where people got to know about them, as he designed for the Michael Clark company. Michael Clark is a dancer and choreographer, and was set up his own company with Ellen van Schoenberg, and these are some of Lee's costumes for him. Another person that Martin tracked down was Syrie, who had a small label, Mark and Syrie. They were untaught, and they sold their designs by fly pitching in Covent Garden. They didn't even have a stall, they just sold from the pavement. And they became really successful really quickly. This is a tear sheet from pictures that I torn out of magazines when I was a teenager, desperate to come to London and find fashion, and this is the Mark and Syrie design. And you can see that they use lots of kind of tourist products like tea towels to make their clothing, and carpets. Also through the process, people would get in touch with us. A girl called Emma Day got in touch with us, who worked for Judy Blame, the accessories designer and the stylist. And this is a bra that Judy made for Nena Cherry that he'd given Emma. I'm going to quickly whiz through now. So this is also a beret that was lent to us by Andrew Newman, who's now a TV producer. So Judy would put lots of buttons and ephemera and different bits and bobs together to make these incredible accessories pieces. And another way that we collaborated was with Dave Swindells, the photographer, who was the nightlife correspondent of Time Out and went around all these clubs taking pictures of all these people. And this is a photograph he took of Andrew wearing his Judy Blame beret at Shoom. Andrew is 17 years old there. And you can see very proud of himself. We also worked with Claire Laurie, the portrait photographer. Claire we also knew from the clubs. We've known for a long time. I didn't even know her surname. I just knew her as Tall Claire because we didn't really know people's surnames. And these Claire took photographs of some of the lenders and participants to the exhibition, some of them wearing the outfits that they'd lent. This is Scarlett Cannon wearing her Mark Lawrence suit that Mark made for her. This is the designer Mark Lawrence, who died of AIDS. And there's a kind of central sort of dark undercurrent that runs through the exhibition, as well as this kind of joyous celebration of youthful creativity, and that's the spectre of AIDS and also deaths around drugs. And a lot of people felt that it was really, really important to remember the people that they'd lost. And Claire and Dave Swindells' photography is also in the catalogue that we produced with Scala Publications for the exhibition. And as I'm sure you're aware, there will be a Lee Barry exhibition at the Tate opening in February, and also an exhibition about the Blitz Club opens in the Design Museum next September. So sort of unwittingly, we found a moment, but it was all from a conversation with friends around the table after seeing a beautiful little tiny exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anjay. Much appreciated. Now we're just going to have Amy and Judith just spending a few minutes rounding up on today's symposium. And then at 6:30, we've got some drinks available in room 117. So you're more than welcome to come and join us for a drink. We'll need at 6 o'clock. It's available at 6. From 6 onwards, okay. The bar owner has told us from 6 o'clock. So we will have drinkies as soon as we're finished. I think we will need to do wristbands, is that right? So if you'd like to join us for drinks, come and find myself or Bree in the striped top, and we can give you a wristband, and we'll make sure you know where you're going. Okay.
Thank you. That's only in 10 minutes' time, so you only have to wait 10 minutes before you're
Thank you.
released. But I just wanted to say thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Just because it's the first time in a way that we've been able to do this, and we've been meaning to do it for a very long time. And every time we've planned something like this, the lineup changes. And I think it's reflective of how fast the ideas are in fact moving in this discipline. And it's not necessarily a different lineup of people, but a different lineup of subjects, and it just shows how it's kind of running away with itself. But no, it's just an opportunity to thank you for coming. It's wonderful seeing familiar faces here, and familiar faces, collaborators, and friends, which has been very much the kind of common thread in the afternoon. So thank you very much.
I was going to say the same thing, really, which I think is when I became a fashion curator, it wasn't a fashionable thing to do, but I didn't get my name put on, you weren't credited, it was your job at the V&A to do exhibitions. And you certainly would never be reflective, or, of course, you put yourself in it, but not overtly, or you weren't allowed to reflect or comment on that. And I think what's been really special about today, and sort of NJ's exhibition has exemplified it, was what Caroline talked about, which I thought was profound, really, because when you find that person you can work with, it changes everything. And when you've got a gang you can work with, it changes everything, where you can just take risks and talk, and you know that you'll always all think the best of each other. And that's how good things happen. And I think, what Caroline said, it was exemplified by what NJ said, because people just came together because they wanted to do it. And they wanted to recognise those people. There's something deeply human that's come out today, which I think people wouldn't necessarily equate with fashion exhibitions or the perception of fashion exhibitions. And it's so rare nowadays for us all to be in a room together. And I know I miss it, but I didn't realise quite how much. And that we mustn't stop doing this. It's great online if you can't come in person, but I think my lesson to myself is if I can, come in person. And thank you so much for coming in person. And also all the people online. And I know even my colleague, Colleen Hill at FIT, emailed and said she's looking in. And I think Ian R. Webb, he Instagrammed me to ask how to come, so I think he's probably heard you speak. And I don't know who else has come, but thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you to those online. And I hope it's communicated itself, because there's a lovely atmosphere here of kind of, being together and actually celebrating something. So thank you very much, and drinks will be served.